Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was the king of Wano and got married to Yamato and Hiyori? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Golden Fox Shogun. The air in the flower capital tasted of sweet dango and roasted squid, a fragrant testament to a peace so profound it had become the new normal. 5 years. 5 years since the sky had been split by dragons. Since the screams of the imprisoned had given way to the laughter of free children. Lanterns, glowing like captured stars, hung from every eave and branch, painting the cobbled streets in hues of warm orange and soft red. The festival of renewed dawn was in full swing, a celebration of the day Kaido's shadow was finally, utterly banished from Wano's shores. At the heart of it all, walking not on a raised dais but among the people, was the man they called the Golden Fox Shogun. Naruto Uzumaki's vibrant orange Hiyori, emblazoned with a simple 9-tailed fox sigil on the back, was a beacon in the throng. He moved with an easy, rolling gait that belied the immense power coiled within him. His blonde hair was longer now, tied back in a loose ponytail that left his sun-kissed, whiskered face clear. He wasn't a boy anymore. The years had carved a quiet authority into his features, settling in the calm, cerulean depths of his eyes. He smiled, a genuine, crinkling grin that hadn't changed a bit. As a small girl with a flower in her hair offered him a piece of candy, he crouched down, his knees popping softly, and accepted it with a theatrical bow. "For me, you're too kind. I promise to vanquish any candy-stealing monsters that might be lurking about." The girl giggled, hiding behind her mother's kimono as Naruto popped the candy into his mouth. The crowd around them chuckled, a warm and familiar sound. They loved him for this, not just for his strength, but for his warmth. He was their shogun, their liberator, but he was also just Naruto. To his right, a step behind, moved a vision of serene elegance. Kazuki Hiyori, her hair an elaborate cascade of black and turquoise adorned with delicate floral pins, watched the exchange with a soft smile. Her kimono, a masterpiece of silk dyed in the colors of twilight, seemed to float around her. She was the soul of Wano, the living embodiment of its long suffering and eventual triumph. Her presence beside Naruto was a constant, visual affirmation of his legitimacy. She was the heritage, he the power that protected it. Her hand rested lightly in the crook of his arm, a touch that was both proprietary and deeply reassuring. She felt the subtle shift in the crowd's energy before he did, her eyes, sharp and perceptive, flickering towards a knot of figures standing near the Grand Torii Gate. To his left, a stark and beautiful contrast, was Yamato. Taller than Naruto, with a wild mane of white and green hair held back by a simple cord, she eschewed the formal kimono for the practical, sleeveless attire of a warrior priestess. Her movements were sharp, predatory, her golden eyes constantly scanning, missing nothing. The massive, spiked kanabo, Takaru, wasn't on her back tonight, a concession to the festival, but its absence only seemed to make her look more dangerous, like a tiger holding back its claws. A low rumble vibrated in her chest as she noticed the same group Hiyori had. She didn't like their stillness, the rigid set of their shoulders. They were stones in a flowing river, and stones were meant to be smashed. "They're watching you, Naruto," Yamato murmured, her voice a low thrum that was for his ears alone. "Everyone's watching me, Yama-chan," Naruto replied, his voice equally low as he waved to a group of cheering carpenters. "Comes with the hat, or, the lack of hat. Hiyori won't let me wear one. Says it messes up the kingly silhouette." Hiyori's fingers tightened on his arm, a silent rebuke. "It would be undignified," she whispered, her gaze still fixed on the men. "And she is right. That is Lord Kageyama of Ringo and his retainers. They are not here for the festival." Naruto's smile didn't falter, but a stillness came over him. Kageyama, an old guard daimyo, a man whose clan had served the Kazuki for generations. He prized tradition and the samurai code above all else. He had been vocal in his disapproval of Naruto's policies, integrating former beast pirates into the workforce, opening Wano's ports to select trade partners, and, most galling to him, placing an outsider on the shogun's throne. It didn't matter that Naruto had been the one to bleed for this country's freedom. He hadn't been born here. Let him watch, Naruto said, his tone shifting from jovial to something harder, like stone beneath the soil. The view was free. He continued his walk, deliberate, Ely leading his wives on a path that would take them directly past the stern-faced contingent. The festive music seemed to thin as they approached, the crowd parting with a mixture of reverence for ire Shogun and unease at the palpable tension. Lord Kageyama was a man who looked as if he'd been carved from old, hard wood. His face was a roadmap of scowls, his graying hair tied in a tight topknot. He and his half-dozen retainers wore matching black and gray kamen, their hands resting pointedly on the hilts of their katanas. They bowed as Naruto approached, a gesture so stiff and precise it was more of an insult than a show of respect. Shogun-sama, Kageyama said, his voice as brittle as dry leaves. A joyous festival. You have brought much change to our lands. The word, change, was delivered like a curse. Peace, Kageyama Dono, Naruto corrected him gently, his eyes level and calm. And prosperity. The people are eating. Their children are safe. That is the only change that matters. Indeed, Kageyama said, his lips a thin, bloodless line. Yet, some wonder if in our haste to embrace the new, we have forgotten the old ways. The ways of the samurai. The spirit that defines Wano. Hiyori stepped forward slightly, her voice as smooth and cold as polished steel. The spirit of Wano is in its people, Lord Kageyama. It is not found in clinging to a past that saw them starve. My father wished to open Wano's borders. Naruto has fulfilled his dream. Kazuki Oden was a man of Wano, born and bled, one of Kageyama's retainers spat, before being silenced by a sharp glare from his lord. The air crackled. Yamato took a half-step forward, a low growl escaping her throat. Her knuckles were white where she clenched her fists. You dare, she began, her voice laced with ice and thunder. Naruto placed a hand on her arm. A simple gesture that nonetheless stopped her cold. His focus remained entirely on Kageyama. Your man is loyal, Naruto said, his tone dangerously mild. I can respect that, but he is also wrong. The festival is for everyone. Enjoy it. He made to move past, a clear dismissal. But Kageyama was not finished. A moment more, Shogun-sama, he called out, his voice ringing with newfound authority. The crowd, sensing a pivotal moment, grew silent. You speak of peace, but a shogun's peace is only as strong as his sword. For 5 years, we have seen your edicts, your alliances. But we have not seen your steel. He unhooked his own katana from his belt, a beautiful blade with a stormy hamon line, and held it out flat. There is a tradition, an old one, for settling questions of a leader's mettle. I, Kageyama of the Ringo region, challenge you to a duel of first blood. A demonstration, to show the people of Wano that their leader is not just a foreign diplomat, but a warrior worthy of the title he holds. A collective gasp swept through the onlookers. It was an audacious, unthinkable move. A public challenge to the man who had defeated a Yonko. Hiyori's face was a mask of cold fury. You overstep yourself, my lord. This is an insult to the shogun and to the Kazuki clan. It is a request, Princess Hiyori, Kageyama countered smoothly. One he is free to refuse. If he believes his hold on power is so fragile that a simple demonstration would threaten it. It was a perfect trap. To refuse was to show weakness, to admit that Kageyama's accusations held some truth. To accept was to legitimize the challenge, to step onto Kageyama's chosen battlefield of tradition and honor. Yamato leaned in, her whisper a promise of violence. Let me handle this, Naruto. I'll break his sword, his pride, and every bone in his body. They'll be sweeping him up for a week. Naruto's eyes met Kageyama's over the heads of the crowd. He saw the flicker of desperate pride. The rigid belief of a man who felt his entire world, his entire code, slipping away. He wasn't just a troublemaker. He was a symptom of a deeper wound in Wano's soul, a fear of losing its identity. Crushing him with overwhelming force wouldn't heal that. It would only prove Kageyama's point that he was a foreign brute. He had to meet him on his own terms. A slow smile spread across Naruto's face. It wasn't his usual warm grin. This one was sharp, predatory, filled with the confidence of a man who held a hurricane in his hands and was being asked to demonstrate a summer breeze. I accept, Naruto said, his voice carrying easily over the silenced crowd. The two words landed with the weight of a mountain. The duel was to be held immediately, in the main plaza before the shogun's palace. Word spread through the capital like wildfire, and what had been a festival crowd transformed into a massive, anxious audience. They filled the square, lining the rooftops and balconies, their lanterns casting a nervous, flickering light on the scene below. In a private chamber just off the plaza, Hiyori worked with frantic, precise movements, helping Naruto into a simpler, more practical hakama. Her usual serene composure was gone, replaced by a taut anger. "You should not have accepted," she said, her voice tight as she cinched the obi belt around his waist. "He seeks to humiliate you. This is not about honor. It is a political play. And if I refused, he would have won," Naruto countered, his voice calm. He placed his hands over hers, stilling them. He'd spend the next year telephoning every daimyo from Hakumai to Kibi that the shogun was afraid of a simple sword. "This is better. We settle it now, in front of everyone." "There is more to it," she insisted, her brow furrowed with worry. "Kageyama is a proud man. But not a fool. He knows he cannot defeat you in a straight fight. There is a trick here, Naruto. A hidden stone in the grass. I'll watch my step," he promised, lifting a hand to cup her cheek. "Hiyori, look at me." Her worried eyes met his. "I'm not going to lose," he said, the statement simple, absolute fact. He wasn't boasting. He was just telling her the color of the sky. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a brief second. "I know," she whispered. "But I have spent 20 years watching the people I love walk into traps. Forgive me if I have forgotten how it feels when they can walk back out." He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gentle press of lips that spoke of promises kept and futures secured. "I'll be right back." As he turned to leave, the door slid open to reveal Yamato. She held a plain, unadorned katana in her hands, its lacquered black sheath gleaming. She stepped inside, her gaze fixed on Naruto, ignoring Hiyori for the moment. "If you're going to do this," she said, her tone gruff, "do it with a proper sword, not some ceremonial piece of junk." She thrust the blade at him. "This was a gift from Tenguyama. It's a fine blade, strong." Naruto took it, testing its weight. It was perfectly balanced, humming with a faint energy of its own. "Thanks, Yamato." "Don't thank me," she grumbled, crossing her powerful arms. "Just don't get hit. The paperwork for a new shogun is a nightmare." Despite the gravity of the moment, Naruto barked a laugh. He stepped closer to her, his voice dropping. "Worried about me?" Her golden eyes flashed. "I'm worried I won't get to be the one to knock some sense into him." She reached out, her calloused fingers gripping his arm with surprising gentleness. "Hiyori is right. He's plotting something. I can smell it on him. Deceit. And something else. Something sharp and bitter." Her instincts, honed by a lifetime of surviving Kaido's cruelty, were rarely wrong. "I know," Naruto said, his expression sobering. "But this is my fight. You and Hiyori have the harder job." Yamato tilted her head. "What's that?" "Trusting me," he said simply. He squeezed her arm, then let go, the katana feeling like a natural extension of his body. He slid the door open, the roar of the waiting crowd washing over them. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a point to make." He strode out into the flickering torchlight, leaving the two most powerful women in Wano standing together in the sudden silence, united by their shared, fierce love for the man walking into the circle. Hiyori's gaze met Yamato's. An understanding passed between them, a silent pact. Yamato gave a short, sharp nod. She would stand as guardian. If this was a trick, if Kageyama made one move that smelled of assassination, she would end it before Naruto even had to. The plaza was silent. Kageyama stood in the center of a wide, cleared circle, his feet planted, his breathing controlled. He looked every inch the master swordsman, a living embodiment of the Bushido he held so dear. Naruto walked to face him, the borrowed katana held loosely in his right hand. He didn't draw it, he simply stood there, a picture of relaxed readiness. He could feel the energy of the crowd, a churning sea of anxiety, excitement, and doubt. He could feel Hiyori's focused worry and Yamato's coiled rage from the dais where they now stood. And he could feel Kageyama. The man's heart was a frantic drumbeat of pride and terror. He was putting everything on this single moment. "The rules are simple, Shogun-sama," Kageyama announced, his voice echoing in the hush. The first to draw blood from his opponent wins. Nothing more. Understood, Naruto said. With a whisper of steel, Kageyama drew his blade. It was a magnificent weapon, reflecting the torchlight like captured water. He settled into a classic middle guard stance, the tip of the blade aimed directly at Naruto's throat. Naruto still didn't draw his sword. He just watched. Will you not draw, my lord? Kageyama asked, a slight tremor in his voice. Or is this more of the outsider's contempt for our ways? I'm giving you a chance to walk away, Kageyama Dono, Naruto replied, his voice calm and even. There's no shame in it. We can say the point was made and go back to the festival. Kageyama's face hardened. Draw your sword, he roared, and lunged. His speed was impressive. For a man his age, he moved like a striking viper. The tip of his blade flew towards Naruto's chest. To the crowd, it was an impossibly fast attack. To Naruto, it was happening in slow motion. He took one sidestep. Just one. The blade hissed past where his heart had been a second before. He still didn't draw. Kageyama pivoted, his blade arcing in a horizontal slash aimed at Naruto's waist. Naruto flowed backwards, the edge of the sword missing him by a hair's breadth. He moved with a liquid grace that seemed utterly at odds with the tension of the duel. He wasn't dodging so much as He was simply not there when the blade arrived. Is this all you have, Shogun? Kageyama growled, sweat beading on his brow. He was pressing the attack, a flurry of strikes, thrusts, and parries, a moss class of the Ringo school of swordsmanship. Each blow was aimed to kill, thinly disguised as an attempt to draw blood. And Naruto met none of them. He weaved, he swayed, he stepped. He never moved more than was absolutely necessary. His feet seemed to glide over the stone plaza. He hadn't drawn his weapon, hadn't raised his hands. He was making Kageyama fight a ghost. From the dais, Yamato's fists were clenched so hard her knuckles were bone white. He's playing with him, she muttered. No, Hiyori breathed, her eyes wide with understanding. He is showing him. He is showing everyone. He doesn't need a sword to be superior. The crowd was mesmerized. This wasn't a duel. It was a dance. One man was all sharp, aggressive angles, the other all fluid, effortless circles. And the circle was always just beyond the angle's reach. Kageyama was panting now, his precise form growing sloppy with frustration. This was the ultimate humiliation. Not defeat, but irrelevance. His blade, his skill, his entire lifetime of training, meant nothing. He couldn't even touch this man. With a final cry of rage and desperation, he lunged forward, abandoning all form for one final, powerful overhead strike. There it is, Naruto thought. The opening. As Kageyama's blade descended, Naruto's hand finally moved. With a sound like a sigh, his own katana slid from its sheath. He didn't meet the blow with a block. He moved inside Kageyama's guard, the flat of his blade deflecting the strike with a flick of his wrist. In the same fluid motion, his left hand shot out and gripped Kageyama's wrist. The old lord froze, his eyes wide with shock. In that instant of contact, Naruto felt it. A faint, tingling sensation spreading from Kageyama's hand. The bitter scent Yamato had mentioned. A subtle poison, worked into the hilt of Kageyama's sword. Designed to be transferred on contact. Not a deadly one, no. Something far more insidious. A fast-acting neurotoxin, meant to cause muscle spasms, paralysis, weakness. Meant to make the invincible Shogun stumble and fall. And it had worked. A thin, red scratch was visible on the back of Naruto's hand where the poisoned guard of Kageyama's sword had grazed him. A triumphant, desperate gleam appeared in Kageyama's eyes. Now, he gasped. Now you fall. The crowd saw the scratch. They saw their shogun had been hit. A wave of fear and shock rippled through them. On the dais, Yamato's rage finally boiled over. She took a step, her hand reaching for the air where her kanabo should be, ready to leap into the fray. Yamato, wait, Hiyori commanded, grabbing her arm. Look, something was happening to Naruto. A soft, golden light began to emanate from him, starting at his chest and spreading outwards. It wasn't the brilliant, violent chakra of Kurama. This was something else. It was warm, gentle, and felt as ancient and powerful as the world itself. It was the energy of nature, perfectly balanced, completely under his control. Sage's flow. The golden aura pulsed, concentrating around the scratch on his hand. The faint tingling of the neurotoxin vanished, not just suppressed, but utterly and completely purged from his system as if it had never been there. The faint red line of the scratch itself faded and healed before their very eyes. Naruto's blue eyes, now ringed with the golden pigment of his perfect sage mode, met Kageyama's horrified gaze. Poison, Naruto said, his voice no longer calm, but filled with a profound, chilling disappointment. This was your honor, Kageyama Dono. This was the spirit of Wano. He didn't wait for an answer. With a twist of his wrist, he disarmed the old lord, sending his katana spinning through the air to clatter uselessly on the stone. With his other hand, he spun his own blade, and the hilt, not the edge, connected with Kageyama's sternum in a single, sharp jab. It wasn't a powerful blow, but it was delivered with such impossible speed and precision that it felt like a thunderclap. The air rushed from Kageyama's lungs. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut, unconscious but unharmed. The duel was over. First blood had been drawn, from Naruto. And he had healed it in an instant, revealing a power far beyond mere swordsmanship. He had been cheated, and he had responded with mercy. For a heartbeat, the plaza was utterly silent. Then, it erupted. A single roar, 10,000 voices strong, crashed through the capital. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated awe and loyalty. They had not just seen a shogun win a duel. They had seen a god walk among them. Naruto stood over the fallen lord, the golden aura slowly receding. He glanced at his hand, then at the stunned faces of Kageyama's retainers, who were frozen in fear. "Take your lord home," he said, his voice once again calm, but carrying an unmistakable weight of command. "When he wakes, tell him that Wano's spirit is not found in poison or pride. It is found in its people. And I am one of them now." He sheathed his katana with a decisive click, turned his back on the scene, and walked towards the dais, towards his family. The crowd parted for him like the sea, their cheers shaking the very foundations of the city. Later that night, the palace was quiet. The festival had wound down, the cheers replaced by the gentle chirping of crickets. In their private chambers, a sprawling suite overlooking the moonlit gardens, the scent of medicinal herbs filled the air. Hiyori sat beside Naruto on a soft cushion, dabbing a soothing salve onto the spot on his hand where the scratch had been. It was completely healed, but she insisted. It was a ritual of care, a way to soothe her own frayed nerves. "You were magnificent," she said softly, her touch gentle. "But you were also reckless." "I was in control the whole time," he assured her, watching the focused expression on her face, the way a stray strand of her beautiful hair fell across her cheek. "I do not doubt that," she replied, not looking up. "But for one moment, when I saw that scratch, I felt the old fear. The one I thought I had buried. The fear of being left alone again." She finally met his gaze, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You promised you would not leave me." He reached out with his free hand, gently brushing the tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I keep my promises, Haim." His use of the affectionate title, Princess, made her breath catch. Kageyama needed to be shown the difference between his power and mine. Not just in strength, but in spirit. Killing him would have made him a martyr. Disgracing him but letting him live, that makes him a lesson. "You are a good ruler, Naruto-san," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Better than we deserve." "Nah," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. "You deserve the world. I'm just trying to make sure you have a nice little piece of it right here." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. They stayed like that for a long moment, simply breathing together. The shogun and his empress finding their center in each other. The shoji screen slid open with a soft rumble, and Yamato entered. She had changed into a simple yukata, and her hair was down, falling in a silver-green wave over her shoulders. She held two wooden training swords. She saw the intimate moment between Naruto and Hiyori, and she paused at the door. "Am I interrupting?" Hiyori pulled back slightly, a faint blush on her cheeks, but Naruto just grinned. "Never. Come on in." Yamato walked over, her gaze landing on Naruto's hand. "All better. Hiyori's a miracle worker," he said. Yamato grunted, a sound of grudging approval. She looked at Naruto, a familiar, restless fire in her eyes. I need to hit something. And you owe me a fight. You stole my chance to pummel that old traditionalist. Naruto chuckled, standing up and stretching. The quiet intimacy with Hiyori had settled his political mind. Now, the prospect of a spar with Yamato would settle his warrior's spirit. The two were different sides of the same coin, and he needed both. All right, he said, taking one of the wooden swords from her. Garden. 10 minutes. Hiyori watched them go, a fond, knowing smile on her face. This was their way. She and Naruto connected through quiet moments and shared responsibilities. Naruto and Yamato connected through action, through the clash of wills and the shared joy of movement. She did not begrudge it, she understood it. It was the foundation of their strange, yet perfectly balanced, family. Outside, the moon was high and bright. The air was cool. Naruto and Yamato faced each other on the soft grass of the garden, the stone lanterns casting long shadows. No sage mode, Yamato declared, spinning her wooden sword. No fancy tricks, just you and me. You got it, Naruto agreed, settling into a stance. What followed was not a duel, but a storm. They moved with a speed and power that would have terrified any normal observer. Their wooden swords clashed with the sound of thunderclaps, the force of their blows sending shockwaves through the air. Yamato fought with the wild, unrestrained power of a natural disaster, her swings wide and devastating, yet possessing a strange, instinctual grace. She was Odin's will personified, utterly free. Naruto was her perfect counterpart. He was more controlled, more precise, his movements economical but packed with explosive force. He parried, he dodged, he flowed around her onslaught, looking for the smallest opening. It was a conversation spoken in the language of combat, each blow a sentence, each parry a reply. They were laughing. Finally, Yamato overextended on a massive swing. Naruto ducked under it, stepped in close, and hooked his leg behind hers, sending her tumbling to the soft grass. He was on her in an instant. His wooden sword pressed lightly against her throat, his body pinning hers. He was breathing hard, grinning down at her. I win, he panted. Her golden eyes, bright in the moonlight, stared up at him. She was also breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling. A slow, feral smile spread across her face. Do you? In a move of blinding speed, she bucked her hips, using her formidable strength to unbalance him. They rolled, a tangle of limbs and laughter, until she was on top, her own sword now resting against his neck. Her long hair fell around them like a curtain, shutting out the rest of the world. Looks like I win, she said, her voice a low, husky purr. He looked up at her, at the fierce, beautiful face so close to his, the untamable spirit burning in her eyes. The energy from the spar still thrummed between them, hot and electric. He could see the pulse beating in her throat. Guess you do, he whispered. She leaned down, her lips capturing his in a kiss that was nothing like the gentle tenderness he shared with Hiyori. This was a kiss of fire and ice, of passion and raw, untamed emotion. It was a clash of spirits, a celebration of strength, a reaffirmation of the wild bond that tied them together. It was freedom. When they finally broke apart, breathless, she rested her forehead against his. Don't you ever scare us like that again, she murmured. The warrior's command softened by a deep well of affection. I won't, he promised. They stayed there for a while, content in the quiet of the garden, the world they had fought for peaceful around them. But the world was larger than Wano. Their moment was broken by the sound of urgent footsteps. A figure in the dark uniform of the Oniwabanshu appeared at the edge of the garden, bowing low. Shogun-sama, forgive the intrusion. The ninja's voice was strained. A report from the Kiyoshiro family. An intruder was apprehended near the old prisons in Udon. Naruto sat up, his playful mood vanishing instantly. Yamato moved to his side, all business once more. A looter. No, Shogun-sama, the ninja said, his voice grim. He was foreign. And he wasn't stealing. He was mapping. Specifically, he was creating detailed geological charts of RC prism stone quarries. Naruto's blood ran cold. That was Wano's greatest strategic resource, the one thing that kept the world government's devil fruit-using powerhouses at bay. Where is he now? Naruto demanded, already on his feet. The ninja's head bowed lower. He is dead, my lord. The moment he was cornered, he bit down on a capsule. We were unable to stop him. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air settled over the garden. This was a professional, a trained agent. Did he say anything? Yamato asked, her hand instinctively going to where her club would be. Only one thing, Yamato-sama, the ninja replied, his voice barely a whisper. He looked at my men, and he smiled. He said, the heavens will not tolerate a second sun. Naruto looked up at the moon, at the infinite, dark sky beyond it. The duel with Kageyama, the political games, the festival, it all felt small now, like the prelude to a much larger, more dangerous song. The peace of Wano had been a warm, gentle dawn. But the sun always draws the attention of the gods. And some gods did not like competition. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Ona's Roar and the Empress's Song. The victory in the plaza had solidified Naruto's reign in the hearts of the common folk, but it had sown a field of silent thorns among the nobility. The daimyo, who once saw him as a powerful but manageable outsider, now looked at him with a new, fearful reverence that was dangerously close to mistrust. The man had purged a fast-acting neurotoxin from his own body with a flash of golden light. He was not just a king. He was a force of nature wearing a human face, and that was a terrifying thing for men who built their power on land deeds and lineage. The first test of this new dynamic came less than a week later, in the Grand Council chamber of the Shogun's palace. The air was thick with the scent of polished cedar and unspoken resentments. All 5 regional daimyo were present. Seated on silken cushions around a low, expansive table. Naruto sat at its head, Hiyori at his right, her posture immaculate, a silent counterpoint to his relaxed presence. Yamato stood behind him, a guardian statue carved from ivory in defiance, her arms crossed, her golden eyes missing nothing. Lord Kageyama was there, a shadow of his former self. He sat shrunken, his gaze fixed on the grain of the wood before him. The public humiliation having scoured him raw. He had not spoken a word since the meeting began. The daimyo of Hakumai, a portly man named Fugetsu, cleared his throat. His jowls quivering with indignation. Shogun-sama, the reports are unambiguous. These remnants of the beast pirates have nested in the ruins of Udon. They are conducting raids on outlying farmsteads. They stole 3 carts of rice and a dozen heads of cattle from my domain just last night. This is an affront. They are animals, and they must be put down. A murmur of grim agreement went around the table. Udon. The name itself was a scar. The prison mines, the weapons factories, the place where hope had gone to die for 2 decades. It was now a blighted, industrial wasteland, a fitting sty for the pigs who had helped build it. Hiyori's expression was cold, her hands clenched in her lap. The farmers of Hakumai have suffered enough, Lord Fugetsu. They will be compensated from the capital's treasury. As for the perpetrators, her gaze hardened. Justice must be swift and absolute. These men had their chance to surrender 5 years ago. They chose to remain serpents in the garden. Her voice, usually so melodic, carried the sharp edge of a judge's gavel. She was thinking of the faces of the villagers she had met on her tours of the country, the lingering fear in their eyes. For her, this was simple. A threat to her people had to be eliminated. An army of samurai should be dispatched at once, another daimyo urged. Surround Udon. Leave no survivors. Burn the ruins to the ground so that nothing foul may ever grow there again. Naruto listened, his fingers steepled before him. He felt the anger, the fear, the thirst for righteous vengeance. It was all valid, but as he looked at Hiyori's unforgiving profile, he felt a pang of unease. Justice and vengeance were 2 paths that started in the same place but ended worlds apart. It was Yamato who finally broke the bloody consensus. No, the word was a physical thing, a solid block of ice dropped into the heated room. All eyes turned to her. The daimyo bristled at being contradicted by someone they still saw as Kaido's monstrous child. Regardless of her allegiance, Yamato stepped forward, placing her hands on the back of Naruto's seat. You are all wrong, she declared, her voice ringing with a conviction that rattled the paper screens. You speak of them as animals. But what did Kaido teach them to be? He taught them that strength is the only virtue. That taking is the only way to live. They only ever knew one path. The one he carved for them with his club and his cruelty. They are pirates, murderers. Fugetsu sputtered. And what were we? Yamato shot back, her gaze sweeping over them. We were prisoners. All of us, In one way or another. Are they not prisoners of Kaido's ideology, even now? Kazuki Oden would not have slaughtered them. He would have faced them, he would have broken their chains, and he would have shown them another way. A path to living with honor, not just dying with it. Her voice cracked with passion. This was not a political argument for her. It was the core of her being, the very essence of the man she idolized. She saw herself in those renegades, someone defined by a monstrous legacy, yearning for a different way to be. Hiyori turned, her expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. Yamato, you did not see what these men did to the people of Ebisu town. You did not hear the children crying from hunger in the streets of the capital. They feasted while our people starved. There is no honor left in them to salvage. Then we will give them ours. Yamato insisted, her knuckles white. We will show them what it means to be a warrior of Wano, not a beast of Kaido. The room was split, a chasm of ideology opening between the two women Naruto loved. On one side, Hiyori, the voice of the victims, demanding justice. On the other, Yamato, the vessel of Oden's will, demanding a chance at redemption. The daimyo looked to Naruto, their expressions a mixture of confusion and expectation. The outsider king, what would he do? Naruto raised a hand, and the room fell silent. He looked from Hiyori's pained, adamant face to Yamato's fierce, pleading one. He saw the truth in both their arguments. Hiyori's pain was real, the threat was real, but Yamato's conviction, it was the same fire he had seen in his master Jiraiya, in his own father. It was the belief that people could change, that no one was truly a lost cause. It was the foundation of his entire life. Lord Fugetsu, Naruto said, his voice calm and decisive, your people will be protected. A contingent of the samurai guard will be posted at your borders, effective immediately. He then turned his gaze to Yamato. You believe you can reach them. You believe you can turn them. I know I can, she said, her voice unwavering. Then go, Naruto said. Take 100 of our best. Go to Udon, but you will not go to slaughter them. He leaned forward, his blue eyes boring into hers. You will go to give them a choice. The one they were never given before. Join Wano, work to rebuild the very land you helped ruin, and earn your place as men. Or be cast out, exiled from these shores forever. But the choice must be theirs. And if they choose violence? Hiyori interjected, her voice sharp with worry. Naruto's expression hardened, a flicker of the golden fox appearing in his eyes. Then you will give them the battle they seek. And you will end it. Understood. Yamato's face split into a grin, fierce and radiant. It was a look of pure, unadulterated purpose. Understood, my shogun. The decision was made. The daimyo were aghast, muttering amongst themselves. Kageyama, for the first time, looked up. His eyes meeting Naruto's with a complex expression of shock and a dawning, grudging respect. Naruto had not chosen the easy path of blood. He had chosen the difficult path of faith. That evening, tension from the council chamber followed them back to their private quarters. Hiyori paced the length of the room, the silk of her kimono whispering against the tatami mats, her body a taut line of disapproval. It is a mistake, Naruto-san, she said, her back to him. You are sending lambs to parley with wolves. They will see her offer as weakness. Yamato, who was checking the straps on her vambraces, scoffed. I am no lamb, Hiyori, and they will learn that quickly enough. This isn't about your strength, Yamato. Hiyori spun around, her face flushed with a rare, open anger. This is about them, their nature. You were not there, in the lean years. You didn't see what they did for a handful of rice, what they were willing to burn for a flask of sake. They are rotten to the core. And, you weren't chained to an island for 20 years by the man who made them that way. Yamato roared back, slamming a gauntleted fist onto a table, making the porcelain tea set rattle. He broke them. He broke everyone. Do you think they enjoyed being his dogs? Do you think they had any other choice? They could have chosen to die with honor. It's easy to talk about honorable death when you're not the one starving. Enough. Naruto's voice was not loud, but it cut through their argument like a blade. He stood up, stepping between them. The sheer force of his presence, usually a comforting warmth, was now a palpable pressure that forced them both into silence. He looked at Hiyori, his eyes softening. Hiyori, your anger comes from a place of love for your people. I understand that. You are their heart, and their wounds are your wounds. He then turned to Yamato. And your passion comes from your belief in freedom. You are Wano's spirit. You see the chain, not the man wearing it. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Both of you are right. And that's what makes this so damn hard. He took a step towards Yamato, placing a hand on her shoulder. But I've met men who were called monsters. Men who had done terrible things. And I saw them change. I saw them find a new way. It's not easy, and it doesn't always work. But if there is even a chance, we have to take it. He squeezed her shoulder. I'm betting on you, Yama-chan. I'm betting your spirit is stronger than Kaido's shadow. He looked back at Hiyori, his expression pleading for understanding. Trust her. Trust me. Hiyori's anger seemed to deflate, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. She looked at Yamato, at the fierce determination in her golden eyes, and then at Naruto, at the unwavering faith on his face. She was outnumbered not by votes, but by a philosophy she couldn't quite grasp. The lives of 100 samurai are in your hands, Yamato, she said, her voice quiet and formal. And the hope of our shogun. Do not fail. With a rustle of silk, she turned and swept out of the room, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. Yamato looked at Naruto, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Maybe she's right. No, Naruto said firmly. You're right. Now go prove it. The ruins of Udon were a monument to despair. The skeletal remains of weapons factories clawed at a sky permanently hazed with gray smoke. Slag heaps formed artificial, blackened hills. And the very air tasted of rust and defeat. A small army of about 300 former beast pirates, under the command of a hulking man named Gentetsu, had moved to their den in the hollowed-out shell of the old prisoner quarry. Yamato arrived not with an army at her back, but alone. She stood at the edge of their makeshift camp, her 100 samurai waiting out of sight over a ridge. Her white hair was a stark banner against the gray landscape, Takaru resting on her shoulder. Lookout spotted her immediately, horns blew. Within moments, she was surrounded by a sea of rough, scarred faces. Men armed with crude axes and rusted swords. They looked at her with a mixture of hatred and confusion. Kaido's child, the traitor. Gentetsu pushed his way to the front. He was enormous, with a snarling face and a thick, black beard. He transformed, his body swelling and contorting. Fur sprouted, claws extended, and in his place stood a monstrous, saber-toothed cat the size of a small elephant. The Neko Neko no Mi, model, saber-toothed cat. An ancient zone, the Oni princess, he growled, his voice a deep, guttural rumble. Come to crawl back to your own kind. Or did your new master send his pet to beg? Yamato didn't flinch. She planted the base of her kanabo on the ground with a solid thud. I came to give you a choice, Gentetsu. Her voice was clear and strong, carrying over the jeers of the crowd. Your leader is gone. His age of terror is over. Wano is free, but freedom is not just for us. It can be for you, too. The pirates laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. We are free, one shouted. Free to take what we want. What have you taken? Yamato countered, her voice rising. A few bags of rice. Some scared cattle. You huddle in this ruin, stealing from farmers. Living like rats in the rubble of your own failure. Is this the glorious freedom you dreamed of? Her words hit home. The laughter faltered. Kaido offered you power, she continued, her voice ringing with Odin's passion. But he gave you chains. He fed you cheap liquor and scraps from his table and called it a feast. He told you to take, but what have you built? What will you leave behind? Nothing but more ruins. She pointed with her club towards the distant, verdant hills of Wano proper. Out there, a new country is being born. A country where people work together. Where there is enough food for everyone. Where strength is used to protect, not to plunder. Our shogun, Naruto Uzumaki, has opened the door for you. Lay down your arms. Come and work. Help us rebuild this land. Earn your food. Earn your home. Earn your honor. This is your one and only chance. Gentetsu let out a deafening roar. Words. The lies of the weak. Kaido taught us the only truth. Power. If you want our allegiance, you'll have to take it. He lunged, a blur of muscle and fur, his massive claws aimed to tear her in half. So be it, Yamato whispered. A wave of glacial cold exploded from her. The ground around her feet frosted over. Her skin took on a divine luminescence, and her form blurred, growing taller, more formidable. Two horns curled majestically from her head, and a flowing, celestial robe of energy seemed to drape itself around her. The guardian deity of Wano. She met Gentetsu's charge head-on. Takaru, now coated in a thick layer of haki and shimmering ice, crashed Aga. Inched his claws with a sound like an avalanche. The shockwave threw the nearest pirates off their feet. The fight was primal, a clash between two apex predators. Gentetsu was all brute force, his NT zone granting him immense durability and savage strength. He tore up the ground, throwing massive chunks of rock and twisted metal at her. Yamato was his equal in strength, but his superior in every other way. She moved with a fluid, predatory grace, her observation haki allowing her to anticipate his clumsy, rage-fueled attacks. She was a storm of ice and steel. She used her glacial burst to create slick patches of ice under his feet, throwing him off balance. She unleashed her mirror mountain, a blast of freezing air from her mouth, to counter his charges, coating his fur in thick frost that slowed him down. She wasn't just fighting him. She was systematically dismantling him. "Is this your power, Gentetsu?" she yelled, dodging a swipe of his claws and delivering a bone-jarring blow to his ribs with her kanabo. The power to be a bigger, angrier beast. Kaido's power was a cage. "And you're still rattling its bars." He roared in frustration and charged again. This time, Yamato didn't meet him head-on. She flowed to the side, her body a blur of white and green. Divine swiftness. White serpent. She moved like lightning, her club a mere extension of her will. The blow was not just a physical impact. It was infused with the conqueror's haki of a king. It struck Gentetsu square in the side of his head. There was no thunderous crack, just a sickening thud. The saber-toothed cat's eyes rolled back, and the massive form crashed to the ground, unconscious, reverting to his human shape as he fell. Yamato stood over him, breathing hard, the cold mist swirling around her. She turned her fierce, divine gaze upon the 300 terrified pirates. "He chose violence," she declared, her voice echoing in the sudden silence. "Now you choose. The age of taking is over. The age of building has begun. Who will join me?" For a long moment, no one moved. Then, one pirate, a young man with a scarred face, dropped his rusted sword with a clatter. Then another, and another. Soon, the ground was littered with discarded weapons. They had seen more than a defeat. They had seen a new kind of strength. A strength that offered a future. 2 weeks later, Hiyori traveled to Udon. She came with a convoy of supplies, lumber, tools, seeds, and food, her personal apology for her doubt. What she found stunned her. The ruins were still there, but they were no longer a place of despair. They were a massive construction site. The former pirates, working alongside Wano samurai and carpenters from the capital, were tearing down the rusted factories, clearing the slag heaps, and tilling the poisoned earth. Yamato was in the thick of it, her sleeves rolled up, hauling a massive timber beam alongside 3 of Gentetsu's former lieutenants. They were laughing. Hiyori saw Gentetsu himself, his head bandaged, silently directing a crew that was laying the foundations for a new granary. He met her gaze, and for a moment, she saw the old defiance. Then, he gave her a short, stiff nod of respect, before turning back to his work. Yamato trotted over, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her arm. "Come to see the lambs, Hiyori?" she asked, a teasing glint in her eye. Hiyori's gaze swept over the scene of frantic, purposeful activity. She saw a group of men who had once been her tormentors sharing their lunch with the samurai who had been their jailers. The air didn't smell of defeat anymore. It smelled of sawdust and sweat. It smelled of hope. "You were right," Hiyori said softly, her voice filled with a humility that made Yamato's grin soften. "My father would be proud of you, Yamato. You have his heart. We all do, now," Yamato replied, looking not at Hiyori, but at the bustling community they were building. Thanks to Naruto, a new, stronger bond formed between them in that moment. A sisterhood forged not just in shared love for one man, but in a shared vision for their nation, built on the foundations of justice and redemption. That night, back in the capital, Hiyori found Naruto on a balcony overlooking the city, the lights of the houses spread out below like a field of fallen stars. She carried her mother's shamisen. She sat beside him, the instrument resting in her lap. Yamato has shown you the heart of a warrior, she said, her voice a soft melody in the quiet night. I wish to show you the soul of a poet. She began to play. The music was hauntingly beautiful, a song of sorrow, resilience, and unyielding hope. It was the song her father had loved, the song she had played in the lonely darkness of her gilded cage for 20 years. When she finished, tears were tracing silent paths down her cheeks. This song is all I had of him for so long, she whispered. Naruto said nothing. He simply listened, his heart aching with a shared sorrow he could now, finally, understand. Teach me, he said, his voice husky. She smiled through her tears. She shifted closer, positioning the shamisen in his lap, her body pressing against his as she guided his larger, calloused hands on the delicate strings. Her fingers were cool and smooth over his, showing him the placement, the pressure. His first few attempts were clumsy, a series of discordant plucks that made him wince. Patience, she murmured, her breath warm against his ear. You must feel the music, not just play the notes. She guided his hands again and again, her head resting on his shoulder, their bodies moving as one. It was more intimate than any kiss, a merging of souls through the shared language of her family's history. Slowly, haltingly, a recognizable, beautiful melody began to emerge from under his fingers. It was her father's song, played by the hands of the man who had fulfilled his dream. You have his strength, Naruto-san, she whispered, her lips brushing his cheek. His will. I wanted you to have his music, too, so that all of him may live on in you. He turned his head, and his lips met hers in a kiss that was achingly tender, full of quiet understanding and Ove as deep and patient as the land of Wano itself. He was her strength, her shield. But she, he realized in that moment, was his peace. His home. The serene moment was shattered by a frantic knocking at the door. Shogun-sama, an urgent report. Naruto and Hiyori broke apart, the spell broken. Naruto sighed. Come in. A lookout from the Kuri coast, breathless and pale, burst into the room and fell to his knees. A fleet, my lord. A massive pirate fleet has been sighted off the eastern coast. Naruto was instantly on his feet. Whose flag? The lookout swallowed hard, his eyes wide with fear. It is not a flag we know well. But the reports from the New World are clear. It is a crimson axe on a field of black. He looked up at Naruto, his voice trembling. It is the fleet of Captain Crimson Val. The man who boasts he will be the one to burn an emperor's territory to the ground. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Crimson Tide. The name fell into the serene chamber like a cannonball, earing the delicate melody of the shamisen and the quiet intimacy of the night. Crimson Val. Naruto had heard the name. Everyone in the New World had. A supernova rookie who had clawed his way to prominence with unmatched brutality. He didn't collect territories like Big Mom or build an information network like Kaido. He was a force of pure entropy. He arrived, he burned, and he moved on, leaving nothing but scorched earth and a terrifying reputation. Where is the fleet now? Naruto asked, his voice losing all its earlier warmth. He was already moving, shrugging on the orange haori he'd discarded. Hiyori placed the shamisen aside, her face a mask of regal composure, the poet replaced instantly by the empress. Holding a position 20 kilometers off the coast of Tokage port in Kuri, my lord, the lookout stammered. They haven't moved in the last hour. It's like they're waiting for us to see them. They are, a deep voice rumbled from the doorway. Jinbei, the Knight of the Sea, stood there, his large frame filling the entrance. He had been dining with the Kiyoshiro family, gathering intelligence from the port cities. Val is an arrogant peacock. He wants his opponent to know he's coming. He feeds on the fear before the battle even begins. Within minutes, the palace was a hive of activity. The war council convened not in a formal chamber, but around the large map table in Naruto's own strategy room. The mood was electric. Kuri is the most logical point of attack, Zoro said, one hand resting on the hilt of his Wado Ikimonji. He leaned over the map, his single eye sharp with focus. It has deep water ports suitable for a large fleet and offers the most direct land route to the capital. We stopped them there. His fleet numbers over 30 ships, Sanji added, lig. HTING a cigarette and exhaling a plume of smoke. He was already dressed for battle, his black suit immaculate. My sources in the capital's kitchens say his crew is a mix of cutthroats from all over the New World. But his command staff is small and elite. The all-stars of his crew, they call them. A first mate known as Goliath, Grog, a sniper, and a stealth operative. Leave the sea to me, Jinbei stated, his voice a bedrock of confidence. The coastline of Wano is treacherous. If they try to make landfall anywhere but the main port, we can use the currents and reefs to smash their ships to driftwood. I will need ships and men who are not afraid to get wet. Naruto nodded, his gaze sweeping over his gathered comrades. The remaining scabbards, Denjiro and Nekomamushi, stood ready. The hats present were a study in deadly calm. But his eyes fell on Yamato, who was practically vibrating with battle energy. Yamato, Naruto said, and her head snapped up. Your new recruits from Udon. Are they ready? A fierce grin spread across her face. They are hungry to prove their loyalty. They hate what Val represents, the same mindless destruction Kaido championed. They will fight. Good, Naruto said. He pointed a finger at the map, at Tokage Port. Zoro, you are the supreme commander on the ground. Hold the port, whatever it takes. The samurai of Wano are under your command. Zoro grinned, a feral flash of teeth. It was the kind of order he lived for. Sanji, you're on logistics and civilian protection. Get the people of Kuri's coastal towns inland. Set up field kitchens and triage stations. And keep your eyes open for that stealth operative. You're the fastest one we've got. Sanji nodded, taking a long drag from his cigarette. Jinbei, the sea is yours. Take the Udon Brigade's ships and the minks. Show them what it means to challenge the helmsman of the Straw Hat Pirates. With pleasure, Jinbei bowed. Hiyori stepped forward. I will go to the main communications tower in the capital. I can coordinate evacuations and troop movements from there, and ensure morale does not break. The people need to hear a steady voice. Naruto looked at her, a wave of pride washing over him. She wasn't just his wife. She was his queen. And what about you, Naruto? Yamato asked, her hand gripping the handle of Takaru. Naruto looked at the map, at the single point representing Crimson Val's flagship. I'm the finisher, he said, his voice quiet but absolute. You all will blunt his spear. I'm going to break it. And the man holding it. He walked to the edge of the balcony, the city lights glittering below. He took a deep breath, drawing the natural energy of the world into himself. A golden aura flared to life around him, gentle yet immensely powerful. He closed his eyes, focusing. Then he bent his knees and leapt into the night sky, a golden comet streaking towards the eastern coast. He would get the lay of the land himself. And he would let Crimson Val know that the fear he loved to cultivate was a two-way street. The Crimson Axe fleet was a blot of violence on the tranquil sea. The ships were brutal things of blackened wood and iron plating, their sails the color of dried blood. At the head of the formation was the Inferno, a vessel that looked less like a ship and more like a floating volcano, belching black smoke from a central, magma-filled caldera. On its deck stood Captain Crimson Val. He was a man built of pure, brutish confidence, with a shock of red hair that seemed to burn in the twilight. He wore no shirt, his torso a tapestry of tattoos and burned scars. A testament to his own volatile power. He laughed, a booming, arrogant sound, as he stared at the distant, verdant shores of Wano. Look at it, Grog. He bellowed to his first mate, a GI, and of a man with arms as thick as tree trunks. Ripe for the picking. They say this Uzumaki fellow took down Kaido. A fluke, a lucky shot. Kaido got old and drunk. We're going to show the world what real power looks like. Grog, a man of few words, grunted and hefted the colossal, double-headed axe that gave him his moniker. Suddenly, a shimmer of gold appeared in the sky above them. It resolved into the figure of a man, hovering there as if standing on solid ground, bathed in a radiant light. Naruto. The crews on the 30 ships fell silent, their jaws slack. Val's smile faltered for a second before twisting into a sneer. So, the little fox comes out to play. Val roared. Come down here and face me. Naruto didn't move. He simply looked down, his sage-mode eyes taking in the entire fleet, counting the cannons. Assessing the troop numbers, feeling the malevolent intent roiling off them. Then, he raised a single hand. A small, spiraling sphere of wind energy formed in his palm. It grew, screaming like a hurricane. 4 massive blades of chakra extending from its core. A Rasenshuriken. He didn't throw it at the flagship. He threw it at the open water a kilometer in front of the fleet. The effect was cataclysmic. The Rasenshuriken exploded with a deafening roar, creating a wound in the ocean itself. A monstrous waterspout, 100 meters high, erupted from the sea, churning with wind and lightning. The front line of ships was tossed about like toys, their rigging snapping, their hulls groaning. It wasn't an attack, it was a statement, a line drawn in the very fabric of the world. Naruto's voice, amplified by his chakra, rolled across the waves, calm and clear. Turn back. This is your only warning. For a moment, there was only the sound of the churning water. Then, Val threw his head back and laughed. A furious, defiant sound. A warning. I'll give you a warning. He slammed his fist into the deck of his ship. It didn't just crack the wood, the entire fist transformed into bubbling, glowing magma. Melting a hole straight through the deck. I have the power of a volcano. Your little breeze is nothing. He pointed a finger at Naruto. Magma Hound. A huge glob of magma launched from his fingertip, forming into the shape of a slavering dog in midair and bounding towards Naruto. Naruto simply held up a hand. An invisible wall of force, Ruo flowing from his palm, met the hound. The magma creature splattered against it with a furious hiss, dissolving into steam and hardened rock that rained down into the sea. Naruto's golden gaze met Val's. The message was clear. I can touch you. Can you touch me? Without another word, Naruto turned and shot back towards the shore, his point made. Val seethed, his entire body glowing with heat. He's mocking me. Full speed ahead. Burn that port to the ground. The crimson tide began to roll. The battle for Curry began at dawn. The first wave of Val's ships, smaller and faster than the rest, tried to bypass Tokog. E-port and land troops on the beaches to the north and south. They were met by Jinbei. The sea itself became his weapon. Standing on the deck of a small Wano patrol boat, he slammed his palms together. Fish man Jujutsu. Vagabond drill. He seized a nearby ocean current, twisting it into a massive, swirling drill of water that tore through the hulls of 3 pirate ships at once, splitting them apart like firewood. The minks, in their sulong forms under the not quite full moon, leapt from ship to ship, flashes of white fur and electro-charged claws. And behind them came the Udon Brigade. The former beast pirates, on their own rugged ships, fought with the desperate ferocity of men defending their last chance at a home. They rammed the enemy vessels, screaming war cries that were half old habits, half new oaths. Jinbei's masterful command of the sea and their raw power turned the coastline into a meat grinder, bottling up the invasion force and funneling them towards the main port, just as planned. At Tokage Port, the real battle began. The Inferno and its escorts unleashed a deafening cannonade. The shells weren't just iron, they were packed with magma, exploding against the ports. Stone walls and spewing molten rock everywhere. Standing on those walls was Zoro. Hold the line, he roared to the terrified but resolute samurai around him. A magma shell screamed towards him. He drew 2 of his swords, a blur of motion. 2-sword style. Nigiri. He slashed, not at the shell, but at the air in front of it. The compressed air from his slashes formed a defensive wall, causing the shell to detonate prematurely. Showering the area in harmless, cooling rock. Val's forces poured from the landing ships, a wave of screaming killers. They were met by a wall of steel, the samurai of Wano fighting with disciplined fury. But the centerpiece of the defense was Zoro. He was a dervish of death, his 3 swords a whirlwind of hockey-infused steel. He moved along the top of the sea wall, a one-man army. Cutting down pirates by the dozen, his green houri splattered with grime and blood. He was met by a challenge. Goliath, Grog, Val's first mate, leapt onto the wall, his landing cracking the stone beneath his feet. He was a mountain of muscle, and his twin-headed axe was bigger than a man. You're the swordsman, pirate hunter, Zoro, Grog grunted, his voice like grinding stones. The captain wants your head. Zoro grinned, adjusting the white blade in his mouth. You'll have to get in line. Their clash was a thing of terrible power. Grog's axe, swung with monstrous strength, met Zoro's 3 swords. The sound was like a temple bell being struck by a meteor. A shockwave of black and red haki erupted from the point of impact, knocking everyone else on the wall off their feet. Zoro's feet skidded back, his arms straining. The man's strength was absurd. Not bad, Zoro grunted, pushing back. But all that muscle just makes for a bigger target. He disengaged, flowing into his three-sword style. Their duel became the anchor point of the entire land battle, a contest of pure power versus sublime skill. Meanwhile, a different kind of battle was being fought in the town behind the port. Sanji, a black blur of motion, raced through the alleys, directing the last of the civilians towards the mountain paths. "Hurry, don't stop until you reach the forests," he yelled, effortlessly lifting a stalled cart loaded with elderly townsfolk and setting it back on its path. His enhanced observation haki suddenly screamed a warning. He leapt backwards, a stiletto blade icing through the air where his neck had just been. A figure dressed in silks of gray and black, their face obscured by a porcelain mask, landed silently on a nearby rooftop. Val's assassin, known only as Whisper. The Shogun's cook, Whisper hissed, their voice a sibilant rasp. "You move quickly, but you can't protect them all." Sanji straightened his tie, his expression turning cold. "Rule num. Beer one of my kitchen. You don't threaten the customers." His leg ignited, flames swirling around his calf. Diabol Hombi. He shot into the air, his movements a fiery dance. The fight was a battle of speed and precision. A high-speed chase across the rooftops of Tokage. Whisper's blades were like flickers of light, silent and deadly. Sanji's kicks were like meteors, explosive and overwhelming. Back in the capital, Hiyori stood in the main communications room, a dozen Den Mushi operators working frantically around her. She was the calm center of the storm. "Lord Inuarashi," she spoke into a receiver, her voice clear and steady. "Nekomamushi reports the eastern flank is collapsing. He needs your musketeers to provide covering fire." "Princess," a frantic voice buzzed back. "The town of Itachi is in the path of the retreat. They have not fully evacuated." Hiyori's eyes closed for a fraction of a second. She thought of Naruto's faith, of Yamato's conviction. Divert 2 squads of samurai to Itachi. Their lives are more important than the ground. Reroute the retreat through the northern pass. It is more difficult, but it is safe. Her orders were swift, decisive, and compassionate. She was saving lives not with a sword, but with a map and a clear head. And across the war-torn province, the soldiers and civilians heard her voice, the voice of their princess, calm and unbroken, and they found new strength. The linchpin of the defense, however, was Yamato. She and the Udon Brigade met the second, largest wave of pirates on the plains outside the port. The pirates sneered at the sight of their former comrades. "Traitors," one of Val's commanders yelled. Gentetsu, the reformed saber-toothed cat, stepped forward. "No," he roared, his voice filled with a new kind of pride. "We are men of Wano." He transformed, and this time, he fought not for a tyrant, but for his home. The Udon Brigade crashed into Val's forces with the force of a tsunami. They fought with a savage joy, redemption being earned in sweat and blood. Yamato was at their head, a goddess of winter and war. She activated her mythical zone form, her presence alone a beacon of power. "Namuji Glacier Fang," she roared, unleashing a massive wave of ice from her club that froze an entire company of pirates solid. She moved through the enemy ranks like a natural disaster, Takaru clearing a path, her ice creating walls and traps. She fought with Odin's spirit, a boundless, joyful freedom that was terrifying to behold. She was proving Naruto right. The battle raged for hours. Wano's forces were holding, but they were bleeding. Val's numbers were immense, and his magma cannons were slowly turning the port to slag. Zoro was locked in a brutal stalemate with Grog. Sanji was still chasing the ghost-like Whisper. Jinbei's fleet was taking heavy damage. The time had come. From his vantage point on a high cliff, Naruto had seen enough. He closed his eyes, sensing the entire battlefield. He felt Zoro's unyielding will, Sanji's burning speed, Jinbei's steadfastness. He felt Hiyori's anxious, steady heart. He felt Yamato's brilliant, blazing fire. They had held the line. They had bought him his opening. He stepped off the cliff. Crimson Val stood on the deck of the Inferno, which had just blasted its way into the ruined port. He was laughing, his body steaming with heat. "Their lines are breaking. Send in the final wave." I want Uzumaki's head. You'll have to take it yourself. The voice came from right behind him. Val spun around. Naruto stood there, not 10 feet away, his golden sage's aura blazing. He hadn't made a sound. Val's eyes widened, then narrowed in fury. He didn't hesitate. He thrust his hands forward. Great eruption. 2 colossal fists of magma, the size of houses, erupted from his hands. Converging on Naruto. The heat was so intense it vaporized the seawater around the ship. Naruto didn't move, he just held up his hands. The air in front of him seemed to ripple, to solidify. He had infused the very atmosphere with a dense, invisible layer of Ruo. The magma fist slammed into this unseen barrier and exploded, washing over Naruto's shield like a wave breaking on a cliff. He stood untouched in the eye of the inferno. Val's jaw dropped. What? How did you? You rely on a power you can't even properly control, Naruto said, his voice cold. He took a step forward. The deck plates groaning under the pressure of his chakra. It makes you sloppy, arrogant. He took another step. You think destruction is strength. Real strength is having the power to destroy everything, and choosing to protect instead. Val screamed in rage and transformed his entire body into a torrent of magma, lashing out at Naruto. I am a volcano. I am destruction. Naruto flowed through the onslaught. He wasn't just dodging. He was moving on surfaces of his own creation, stepping on platforms of pure haki in the air, his sage's flow predicting the path of every magma tendril. He was untouched, untouchable. He appeared right in front of Val's molten face. Let me show you. He drew his fist back. It was cloaked not in fire, but in the serene, golden light of his sage energy, swirling with the invisible, crushing force of advanced Ruo. He wasn't aiming for a kill shot. He was aiming to shatter an ego. Sage art. Unbreakable will strike. His fist connected with Val's magma form. The Logia's natural defense, his ability to let attacks phase through him, failed completely. Naruto's Ruo-infused fist found the real body within the magma. The impact was absolute. It wasn't loud. It was a deep, resonant thump that seemed to shake Val's very soul. All the magma instantly dissolved, revealing Val's human form, his eyes wide with disbelief. A spiderweb of cracks, not on his skin, but on his very will, seemed to spread from the point of impact. The overwhelming, protective, life-affirming energy of Naruto's sage art was the absolute antithesis of Val's destructive ambition. It didn't just hurt his body, it poisoned his spirit. He coughed, not blood, but his own confidence. The fire in his eyes flickered and died, leaving only the cold ash of utter defeat. He crumpled to the deck, not unconscious, but broken. His will to fight, his ambition, his entire identity, erased by a single, mercifully placed blow. Naruto stood over him. The battle fell silent. On the walls, Zoro, having finally overpowered and disarmed Grog, watched. In the town, Sanji, having cornered and KO'd Whisper with a final, devastating kick, looked towards the port. At sea, Yamato, standing amidst a field of frozen pirates, felt Naruto's chakra signature flare and then settle. It was over. Naruto turned to the terrified crew of the Inferno. The battle is finished. Surrender, and you will be treated fairly. Resist, and, he let the threat hang in the air. Weapons clattered to the deck across the entire fleet. As the smoke began to clear, Naruto, Yamato, and Hiyori, who had rushed from the capital, met on the ruined sea wall. They were covered in soot, blood, and grime. Hiyori rushed to Naruto, her hands checking him for injuries. He caught her hands, his grip gentle. Yamato came and stood beside them, leaning heavily on her club, grinning with exhaustion. No words were needed. Naruto just reached out, pulling both of them into a tight, shared embrace. They were a strange, impossible family, and they had just held back the tide. It was then that they saw it. On the horizon, a new fleet appeared, sailing through the wreckage of Val's ships. These vessels were clean, orderly, and flew the flag of the world government. At their head was a massive battleship. A Den Mushi on a nearby samurai's belt rang. He answered it, his face pale. Shogun-sama, it's the Marines. Vice Admiral Onagumo, he says they were tracking the Crimson Axe pirates and have arrived to offer their assistance. Naruto let go of his wives, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the approaching fleet. The timing was too perfect. The wolf had been driven off, and now the vultures were circling. "Assistance," Naruto muttered, a humorless smile on his face. He could feel the deceit rolling off them. A slimy slick on the ocean of his senses. This was the second phase. The spy had been the first. This was the escalation. "Tell the Vice Admiral his assistance is appreciated, but no longer necessary," Naruto said to the samurai, his voice carrying an icy authority. "However, I would be honored to receive him and a small diplomatic delegation in the flower capital. It is high time Wano officially opened talks with the world government." Yamato looked at him, confused. "Naruto, you can't trust them." "I don't," Naruto said, his gaze locked on the lead marine ship. "But if they want to see the new Wano, I'll let them have a look. A snake is least dangerous when you can see it in your garden." Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Serpent in the Garden. The arrival of the Mar. Ines draped the flower capital in a shroud of polite, suffocating tension. The city, still buzzing from the victory in Curry, now moved with a hushed watchfulness. The people cheered for their Shogun W. Henhi escorted the delegation through the main thoroughfare, but their eyes were wary, their smiles tight. They had spent a lifetime learning to mistrust the flag that now flew from the guest quarters of the shogun's palace. Vice Admiral Oniguma was a man who seemed to be perpetually scowling. A tall, severe figure with 3 extra spider-like arms sprouting from his back due to his devil fruit. He walked with a rigid posture that radiated arrogance. He offered condolences for the attack, praise for Wano's spirited defense, and a dozen other diplomatic pleasantries that felt like carefully sharpened insults. "A remarkable victory, Shogun Uzumaki," Oniguma said during their first formal meeting. They sat across from each other, a low table laden with untouched tea between them. Hiyori sat beside Naruto, a vision of perfect, unreadable grace. Yamato stood behind them, her presence a silent, simmering threat. To repel a pirate of Val's caliber with only local forces is impressive. It makes one wonder why Wano has felt the need to remain isolated for so long. "We've been busy," Naruto replied, his smile easy but his eyes sharp. "House cleaning. I'm sure you understand. Now that the dust has settled, we're ready to re-engage with the world. On our own terms." Of course, Oniguma said, waving a dismissive hand. "The world government has no desire to infringe upon Wano's sovereignty. We merely wish to establish formal relations. Trade agreements. A permanent marine outpost to ensure your security." It was a masterclass in political maneuvering. Every offer of friendship was a hook. Every promise of aid a chain. Hiyori parried his verbal thrusts with practiced ease, her knowledge of Wano's laws and customs a shield against his encroachments. She spoke of tariffs, resource protection, and the sacred nature of Wano's soil, wrapping their refusal in layers of such dense politeness that Oniguma couldn't find a seam to pry open. But Naruto knew this was all a stage play. Oniguma was the loud, blustering actor meant to draw the audience's attention. The real danger was in the shadows. From the moment the marine delegation had set foot in the capital, Naruto's sage's flow had been on high alert. He could feel the pinpricks of malice hidden within the Vice Admiral's entourage, faint, disciplined, and utterly cold. They were like black holes in the vibrant tapestry of the city's life force. Cypher Pole. What he didn't know was their target. The answer came not from the palace, but from the smoky, lantern-lit alleys of the city's entertainment district. Sanji, having foregone the stuffy political meetings, had established an informal base of operations in the kitchen of a bustling restaurant. Here, information flowed more freely than sake. Waitresses, street performers, and even some of Kiyoshiro's yakuza, all charmed by his chivalry and swayed by his peerless cooking, brought him whispers. "They're asking strange questions," Sanji-san, a geisha named Kiku told him. Her painted face creased with worry as she helped him prep vegetables. "The ones who came with the Marines, the ones in the white suits. They don't ask about the Shogun. They ask about Lord Kageyama." Sanji stopped chopping, his cigarette hanging forgotten from his lips. Kageyama, the disgraced daimyo. What kind of questions? About his family, his finances, his pride, she whispered. And they were seen near his residence late last night. Just watching. Sanji's blood ran cold. He excused himself, stepping into a back alley and pulling out a small, specialized Den Mushi. It connected directly to the Onawabenshu, Wano's elite ninja corps, now under Naruto's direct command. "This is Black Leg," he said into the receiver. "I have a thread. The CP agents are showing interest in Lord Kageyama. Put him under full surveillance. I want to know if he so much as breathes in a different direction." The trap was beginning to take shape. The world government wasn't trying to break down the door. They were looking for a key they could use to unlock it from the inside. Lord Kageyama sat in the dim light of his study, the shoji screens closed, shutting out the world. He had not left his home since the duel. He had become a ghost in his own life, haunted by the memory of Naruto's disappointed eyes and the sound of 1,000 people cheering for his humiliation. A soft knock came at his garden door. His retainers were under orders to admit no one. He ignored it. "Lord Kageyama," a voice whispered from the other side of the screen, smooth as oiled silk. "We have not been formally introduced, but we share a common dissatisfaction with the current management of Wano." Kageyama froze. He recognized the tone. It was the sound of a government man, a creature of shadows and secrets. "I have nothing to say," Kageyama said, his voice a hoarse rasp. "Oh, I think you do," the voice continued. The screen slid open silently, revealing a tall man in an immaculate white suit, his face obscured by a blank, smiling mask. He was flanked by two others, identical in dress and unnerving stillness. A dove perched on his shoulder. "Rob Lucci, you are a man of tradition, a true samurai. It must gall you to see your nation, your very heritage, handed over to a blonde-haired boy with the power of a demon and the manners of a jester." Lucci stepped into the room, his movements utterly silent. He placed a small, ornate box on the table in front of Kageyama. "The world government believes that Wano requires a leader who understands its soul. A leader from one of its great clans. A leader like you." Kageyama stared at the box, his heart hammering in his chest. This was treason. This was madness. But the words were a balm on his wounded pride. They saw him. They understood. What do you want?" he breathed. Lucci's masked face seemed to smile wider. "The Golden Fox's power is absolute. Attacking him directly is folly. But a king's power rests on two pillars, his strength, and his legitimacy. We cannot break his strength, not yet. But his legitimacy," he gestured towards the palace. "His legitimacy is tied entirely to the princess, Kazuki Hiyori. She is the symbol, she is the Kazuki blood that sanctifies his reign." Lucci leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "If Princess Hiyori were to meet with a tragic accident, Wano would be plunged into chaos. The daimyo would bicker. The people would despair. The outsider shogun's claim would turn to ash. And in that chaos, a strong, traditional leader, backed by the full might and resources of the world government, could restore order." He tapped the box. "Become that leader, Lord Kageyama. Help us create the opening, and we will make you shogun. A true shogun, for a true Wano." Kageyama stared at Lucci, then at the box. His hand trembled as he reached for it. For 20 years, he had dreamed of a Wano free from Kaido. But the Wano he had gotten was not the one he had envisioned. It was open, changing, and ruled by an outsider who healed himself with golden light. It was alien. In his heart, a seed of bitter resentment, planted during his public humiliation, began to sprout. Watered by Lucci's poisoned words, he opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a single, perfect dose of a rare, untraceable poison derived from a flower that only grew on a single island in the West Blue. Odorless, colorless, and lethal in seconds. From the shadows of the roof across the street, an Onawabenshu agent, hidden beneath a disguised jutsu, watched the entire exchange, his heart cold with dread. He relayed the information through a silent hand signal to another agent, who then raced towards the palace. The snake was in the garden, and it had found its venom. The assassination was planned for the following day, during a formal tea ceremony Hiyori was hosting for the female members of the Marine delegation. It was the perfect setting, a quiet, refined affair, where security would be present but not overtly aggressive. Kageyama, in his role as a respected if disgraced daimyo, would attend to, formally apologize, to the princess for his past transgressions, a public act of penance. This would be his excuse to get close. He would create a diversion, and in the ensuing chaos, Lucci's agents, disguised as palace guards, would strike. The morning of the ceremony was bright and clear. Naruto stood with Yamato in the training yard, the rhythmic clash of their wooden swords the only sound in the early morning air. But there was no joy in the spar today. Their movements were sharp, efficient. Their faces grim. The Anawabanshu confirmed it, Naruto said, parrying a heavy swing from Yamato. Lucci met with him. The poison is in play. Yamato's eyes blazed with fury. She broke off the spar, slamming the tip of her sword into the dirt. Then let's end this. We storm Kageyama's house right now. We drag him and those CP0 bastards into the street. I'll gladly play the role of the monster they think I am. And start a civil war. Naruto countered, his voice dangerously calm. The moment we move on a daimyo without irrefutable, public proof, we prove Onagumo's point that I am a tyrant. The other daimyo will panic. The world government will have the excuse it needs to intervene. No, we let them play their hand. You're going to let Hiyori be the bait. Yamato's voice was incredulous. Hiyori is not bait, a serene voice said from the edge of the yard. Hiyori stood there, dressed in a stunning kimono of pale lavender. Her face was calm, but her eyes held a chilling resolve. I am the queen of this country. If there is a threat to its stability, I will face it. I will not hide while others fight my battles. She walked towards them, her gaze meeting Naruto's. I will host this ceremony. I will face Kageyama. I will trust my husband and my sister to protect me. Her courage was absolute, a quiet mountain of strength that dwarfed Yamato's fiery rage. Yamato looked from Hiyori's determined face to Naruto's steady one and understood. This was not a risk. It was a counter-trap. So, Yamato said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. We're springing the trap on them. I like it. What's my role? You will be Hiyori's shadow, Naruto instructed. Stay out of sight, but be ready. They won't be expecting you. He then turned to Hiyori. I will be there, in the garden. They won't see me, but I'll hear everything. His eyes glowed faintly gold for a second. Every heartbeat, every lie, every flicker of killing intent. The tea house in the palace gardens was an oasis of tranquility. Water trickled over smooth stones into a koi pond, and the scent of cherry blossoms hung in the air. Hiyori sat on a silk cushion, forming the tea ceremony with a grace that betrayed none of the violent tension coiling beneath the surface. The marine women watched, oblivious. Yamato was hidden in the rafters above, cloaked in shadow. Her body as still as a stone gargoyle. Her hand rested on the hilt of Takaru, which she had insisted on bringing. Naruto was meditating in the garden just outside the open shoji screens, seemingly asleep. But he was anything but. Through his sage's flow, the world was an open book. He could feel the nervous flutter of the marine women's hearts, the deep, steady rhythm of Hiyori's, the coiled, predatory stillness of Yamato's. And then he felt new signatures enter the garden. Onagumo, taking a stroll. And with him, 3 figures whose life energy felt like voids. Lucci and his agents, moving into position. Lord Kageyama was announced. He entered the tea house and prostrated himself before Hiyori, his forehead touching the mat. Princess Hiyori, he began, his voice trembling with manufactured emotion. I have come to beg your forgiveness for my unforgivable arrogance. I have dishonored myself and my clan. My life is yours to command. Hiyori looked down at him, her expression unreadable. Rise, Lord Kageyama. Wano has seen enough division. Your apology is accepted. It was the signal. Kageyama rose, and as he did, he stumbled, crying out in alarm and knocking over the low table. The exquisite tea set crashed to the floor. The marine women gasped. In that single, engineered moment of chaos, 2 figures dropped from the ceiling, not where Yamato was, but from the other side of the room. 2 CP0 agents. Their white suits a blur, their fingers aimed like daggers at Hiyori's throat. Shigen. They moved at inhuman speeds. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had planned for the shogun. They had planned for his guards. They had not planned for the guardian deity. A roar of pure, distilled rage echoed from the rafters above. Get away from her. Yamato dropped down between Hiyori and the assassins. A white-haired avalanche of fury. She didn't even draw her club. Her fist, wreathed in the icy mist of her power and coated in black armament hockey, slammed into the chest of the first agent. It wasn't a punch, it was a demolition. The man's ribcage imploded, and he was sent flying backwards through the paper wall of the tea house, a broken marionette. The second agent, shocked but disciplined, redirected his attack towards Yamato. She met his finger pistol with her forearm, the impact creating a sharp crack. She grunted, the attack powerful, but her haki held. She grabbed his arm, and with a guttural cry, she slammed him into the floor so hard the timbers splintered. Outside, the third agent, Rob Lucci, saw his plan disintegrating. He abandoned his disguise and shot towards the tea house, intent on finishing the job himself. He transformed in midair, his body swelling into the monstrous, sleek form of his leopard zone. He never made it. A golden blur intercepted him. Naruto appeared before him, his face devoid of all its usual warmth. It was a mask of cold, absolute fury. The look in his eyes was more terrifying than any demon. "You tried to kill my wife," Naruto said, his voice dangerously soft. Lucci, for the first time in his life, felt a prickle of genuine fear. He lashed out with a rankyaku, a blade of compressed air, aimed at Naruto's head. Naruto didn't even flinch. He simply raised a hand, and the air blade dissipated harmlessly against his palm. He had taken control of the very air it was made from. "My turn," Naruto said. He formed a Rasengan in his palm. But this one was different. It was small, dense, and didn't radiate wild energy. It was infused with his sage's flow, silent and contained. He moved, not with a burst of speed, but by simply being where Lucci was. He pressed the Rasengan against the leopard man's chest. Sage art. Rasengan of stillness. There was no explosion, no grand destructive display. The Rasengan simply spun, pouring a torrent of perfectly controlled natural energy directly into Lucci's body. It was like pouring an ocean into a teacup. Lucci's zone transformation sputtered and failed, his body forcibly reverting to its human form. He coughed up blood, his eyes wide with shock as every cell in his body screamed in protest against the invasive, overwhelming energy. He fell to his knees, his formidable Rokushiki skills useless. His body paralyzed. Naruto stood over him, his golden aura casting a terrifying light. He looked past Lucci to Vice Admiral Onagumo, who was frozen in horror, his scheme laid bare. "Onagumo," Naruto called out, his voice echoing through the silent garden. "Your diplomatic mission appears to be over." Later, in the palace's dungeon, Naruto faced a shackled Kageyama. The old lord was pale, trembling, a broken man. "Why?" Naruto asked, his voice weary. There was no anger left, only a deep, profound disappointment. "I spared your life. I gave you back your honor." "Why?" Kageyama finally looked up, his eyes filled with tears of shame. "Because I was afraid," he whispered. You change everything. The traditions, the code." Wano was losing itself. I thought I was saving it." "You don't save a house by burning it down, Kageyama," Naruto said quietly. He shook his head. "You have betrayed your princess, your country, and your own honor. Why? Oh, you will be stripped of your title and your lands. You will live out your days in the ruins of Udon, and you will spend every one of them rebuilding what you tried to destroy. You will learn what it truly means to build a nation. Not with pride and poison, but with sweat and calloused hands." Naruto left him there, a man condemned not to death, but to redemption. He then went to see Lucci. The CP0 agent was in a C-prism stone cell, still struggling with the after effects of Naruto's attack. This mission was unsanctioned, wasn't it? Naruto stated, not asking. The fleet admiral would never authorize something this reckless. This came from higher up. From the celestial dragons. Lucci just glared at him, spitting a wad of blood onto the floor. "You are a blasphemy, Uzumaki. A false god Who's very existence is a heresy against the celestial heavens. You cannot be allowed to exist. Tell me who sent you," Naruto demanded. Lucci smirked, a bloody, defiant expression. "He is the hand of judgment. The archangel of the Holy Land. And he is coming to correct this world's imperfections. Starting with you." He coughed, a ragged, painful sound. "He is Saint Jagarcia Icarus." The name hung in the air, heavy and strange. A celestial dragon with a title. A god's knight. As if on cue, Vice Admiral Onagumo, now a prisoner himself, was dragged forward by two samurai. He held out a small, black den mushi. This was delivered to my ship, he stammered, his arrogance completely gone. It's for you. Naruto took the datadeal. He activated it. A holographic image flickered to life, showing not a face, but a seal, a sun with wings. A voice emerged, and it was the calmest, most terrifying thing Naruto had ever heard. It was cultured, serene, and held the absolute certainty of a god passing judgment. Naruto Uzumaki, the golden fox of Wano. The voice was like chimes of ice. I am Saint Jagarcia Icarus. I have watched your meteoric rise. Your power is an anomaly, an untamed variable in a divinely ordered equation. Your ideals of freedom are a cancer, spreading hope to those who are meant to serve. You are a second sun in a sky that has room for only one. The voice paused, and in the silence, Naruto could feel the weight of an entire world's hierarchy pressing down on him. You have built a kingdom on a foundation of blasphemy. You have stolen the loyalty of a nation and the hearts of its royalty. Therefore, by the authority vested in me as a knight of the celestial heavens, I pronounce judgment. Wano is a heretical kingdom. You are a false god. And I am coming, at the head of the celestial armada. To bring divine correction, I will extinguish your false dawn and return your island to the proper order of things, darkness. The transmission cut out, leaving only a chilling silence. Hiyori and Yamato had entered the dungeons and heard the entire message. Hiyori's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a fear she hadn't felt since Orochi's reign. Yamato's face was pale, her usual bravado replaced by a grim understanding of the scale of this new threat. This wasn't a pirate. This wasn't a rogue marine. This was one of the gods of the world, declaring war. Naruto stood motionless, the datadeal clenched in his fist. He looked at his wives, at their frightened faces, and his own fear was burned away by a cold, protective fury. He had fought for this peace. He had bled for this family. He had promised them a home. And no self-proclaimed god was going to take it away from him. He tossed the datadeal to the floor, crushing it under his heel. Let him come, Naruto said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He'll find out what happens when a god picks a fight with a demon. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Sage and the Saint. The judgment of a god travels faster than any ship. Saint Icarus's declaration did not arrive in Wano as a rumor, it descended like a divine decree. Secret channels, controlled by the world government, ensured that every major power in the New World, from the remaining emperors to the revolutionary army, heard the news. The Celestial Armada, a fleet spoken of only in whispers, had been mobilized. Its target, the upstart kingdom of Wano and its false god, Shogun. For the first time since the fall of Kaido, a pall of true, existential fear settled over the flower capital. The victory against Crimson Val felt like a child's game in comparison. This was not a battle for territory or resources. It was a holy war. The world's self-appointed heavens had declared Wano an unforgivable sin. The council that convened in the Shogun's palace was not one of bickering daimyo, but of hardened warriors steeling themselves for the apocalypse. Zoro stood with his arms crossed, his single eye radiating a bloodthirsty calm. Sanji Chain smoked in a corner, his mind already calculating the logistical nightmare of feeding a nation under siege. Jinbei, his face grim, traced the treacherous sea currents around Wano on a large map, planning a defense against a fleet said to be blessed with divine winds. The remaining scabbards, Denjiro and Nekomamushi, felt the chilling echo of the past, another overwhelming force coming to crush their home. Naruto stood at the head of the table, his presence the anchor against the rising tide of panic. He was not shouting orders or making grand speeches. He was listening, his sage's flow extending out, feeling the fear, the resolve, the desperate courage of every person in the room. His goal is to make an example of us, Hiyori said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She stood beside Naruto, not as a princess needing protection, but as a queen analyzing her enemy. This is not a war of conquest. It is a war of ideology. Icarus cannot allow a nation to thrive under a power that is not his own. To win, we must do more than just survive. We must prove his ideology is hollow. We prove that by smashing his pretty face in, Yamato growled, pacing behind the table like a caged tiger. Takaru was slung over her back. And she radiated an aura of barely contained violence. He calls himself a god. Let's see how well he handles a taste of my club. Yamato is right, Zoro said, his voice a low growl. Ideology doesn't mean a thing if you're dead. This comes down to who's stronger. Him or us. Naruto held up a hand, and silence fell. You're both right. He looked from Zoro's grim face to Hiyori's determined one. We will fight them on the beaches, in the ports, and in the streets. We will show them the strength of a united Wano. But Hiyori is right. Our victory won't be complete until we shatter the idea that they are divine. We have to win so decisively that the whole world sees the truth. They are just men. And men can be broken. His gaze swept the room. This won't be a defensive war. We are not waiting for the storm to break. We are going to become the storm. His plan was audacious, born of a lifetime of defying impossible odds. He wasn't just going to defend Wano. He was going to turn the entire nation into a single, massive weapon. First, intelligence. Naruto's fingers tapped the map. We are blind. I need to know the size of his fleet, their weapons, his personal abilities. He closed his eyes, and 1,000 points of golden light flared into existence in the room before shooting out through the walls in every direction. Shadow clones. Each one infused with a trace of his sage's flow. They were a sensor network unlike any the world had ever seen. They spread out across the seas, a web of chakra designed to give him eyes on the horizon. Second, unification. He looked at Nekomamushi. Master Cat Viper, go to Zo. We need the minks. All of them. Tell them this isn't just Wano's fight. This is a fight for the dawn of the world that Pedro died for. The old mink's eyes hardened with resolve, and he bowed low. Denjiro, mobilize the Kiyoshiro family. I want every Yakuza, every informant, every street-level asset you have watching for sympathizers and spies. The enemy is already within our walls. We need to root them out. Denjiro nodded, his hand on his sword. Jinbei, Zoro, Sanji, Yamato, Naruto's voice became iron. You will train our forces. The samurai, the Udon Brigade, the minks when they arrive. Forget traditional fighting styles. Teach them to work together. Teach them to be a single army. Zoro, you and the samurai are our iron core. Yamato, you and the Udon Brigade are our shock troops. Sanji, you and the Anawabanshu are our swift flankers. Jinbei, you and the minks are our raging sea. The orders were clear, direct, and infused with such absolute confidence that it began to push back the fear in the room. This was not a king preparing for a siege. This was a master strategist preparing for a war he fully intended to win. But even as he laid his plans, a horrifying taste of what was to come arrived. It happened 3 days later. A shadow clone, hundreds of kilometers out at sea, suddenly dispelled. The feedback hit Naruto in the middle of a strategy session, a psychic shock of blinding white light and a feeling of absolute, chilling emptiness. He stumbled, gripping the edge of the table, a gasp escaping his lips. Naruto! Hiyori cried, rushing to his side. They're here, he breathed, his eyes wide. Not the fleet. Something else. Something is coming. Fast. He shot out of the palace and into the sky. A golden streak heading for the capital's western perimeter. Yamato, seeing the look on his face, followed without a word, her powerful legs launching her from rooftop to rooftop in pursuit. They arrived at the edge of the city just in time to see 3 figures descend from the clouds. They did not fly with wings of flesh and feather, but on platforms of crackling, geometric light. They wore pristine white armor that seemed to be fused with their bodies, and their faces were covered by impassive, glowing visors. They looked less like men and more like angels from a cold, unfeeling heaven. They were the Seraphim Guard, the personal vanguard of Saint Icarus. One of them raised a hand, and a beam of pure, concentrated light shot out, a laser identical to Kizaru's, but seemingly faster, more focused. It struck the outer wall of the flower capital, and a section 100 meters wide simply vanished. No explosion, no dust, just gone. The citizens below screamed, a wave of terror washing through the city. Their target is the palace, Naruto said, his face grim. A decapitation strike. They want to kill the leadership before the war even starts. Then they'll have to go through us, Yamato snarled, landing beside him. Takaru was in her hand, already crackling with ice. The three seraphim descended, landing in a deserted plaza, their movements perfectly synchronized. Their Rs scanned the area before locking onto Naruto and Yamato. Target identified. False god Naruto Uzumaki, one of them said, its voice a synthesized, emotionless monotone. Secondary target. Oni hybrid Yamato. Mission. Eradicate. So they can talk, Yamato said, grinning ferociously. Good. I like it when they can scream. She charged, a blur of white and green. The first seraphim met her head on. It didn't draw a weapon. Its arms simply morphed, the white armor shifting and reshaping into a massive, diamond-hard blade, eerily reminiscent of the former warlord, Jozu. Yamato's hockey-infused kanabo crashed against the diamond blade, and the resulting shockwave shattered every window in a 2-block radius. A second seraphim targeted Naruto. It stomped its foot, and the ground itself rippled, too. RNING into a rolling wave of earth and stone, a power much like Whitebeard's, but colder, more precise. Naruto didn't move, he stomped his own foot, a pulse of golden sage energy flowing into the ground. His power didn't just counter the quake, it pacified it. The rolling earth smoothed out, settling back into place as if nothing had happened. The third seraphim, seeing this, changed tactics. Its back split open, and small, bear-like paws emerged. It held its hands out, and a cushion of shimmering, paw-printed energy appeared in the air. It began to repel the very air around it, sending cannon balls of invisible force at Naruto with terrifying speed. Kuma's power. This was their nature. They were living weapons, cybernetically enhanced clones given manufactured devil fruit abilities. Pacifistas, but evolved to a godlike degree. Naruto moved, a golden flash. He appeared above the third seraphim, a Rasengan already formed. The seraphim reacted with impossible speed, creating a repellent shield above it. The Rasengan slammed into the shield, the two forces grinding against each other in a stalemate of raw power. At the same time, a new combatant entered the fray. A green streak shot through the plaza, and 3 swords flashed. Zoro had arrived. You two started the party without me, he yelled, his blades already clashing against the diamond arm of the seraphim fighting Yamato. With Zoro joining her, the tide of that fight turned. Yamato's overwhelming power and Zoro's peerless skill was too much for the single-minded machine. Rengoku Onigiri, Zoro roared, his hockey-coated blades cutting not at the diamond arm, but at the less protected joints at the shoulder and elbow. Simultaneously, Yamato unleashed her own attack. Hallowed Glacier Slash, her club, coated in a thick layer of ice and hockey, slammed into the seraphim's chest. The combined impact was devastating. The diamond arm shattered, and the seraphim's torso caved in. It stumbled back, sparks flying from its ruptured chassis, before collapsing. One down. Naruto, seeing his comrades handle the first, focused on the 2 remaining. The Quake Seraphim sent another tremor through the ground, but Naruto was already in the air. The Kuma Seraphim sent a barrage of pressure cannons at him. This is getting old, Naruto muttered. He created 2 shadow clones in midair. One clone formed a massive Rasengan, the other an Odama Rasengan. Naruto himself began to form a Rasenshuriken. The 3 seraphim, their processors linking, identified the threat level as critical. They changed tactics, their bodies glowing. They were preparing to self-destruct, to take out the entire city block with them. Oh no, you don't, Naruto yelled. He, along with his clones, unleashed their attacks. The 3 different types of Ra Sengen converged on the 2 remaining seraphim. The resulting explosion was not one of fire and force, but a vortex of pure, chaotic chakra. The seraphim were not just destroyed, they were utterly disintegrated. Their self-destruct sequence overwhelmed before it could even begin. The plaza fell silent, the air tasting of ozone and burnt metal. Naruto landed, breathing heavily. Zoro leaned on his swords, panting. Yamato stood over the wreckage of the first seraphim, her chest heaving. They had won, but the cost was a wrecked city block, and the chilling realization of what they were up against. These were just the vanguard, Zoro said, his voice grim. The scouts. They had the powers of former warlords, Yamato added, nudging a piece of wreckage with her foot. But no soul, no heart, just programs. Icarus isn't just bringing an army, Naruto said, looking at the destruction. He's bringing an arsenal of monsters. And he sent them here to die, just to test our strength. The message was clear. Saint Icarus was not just a warrior, he was a cold, calculating strategist. And he had access to the world government's most terrifying and forbidden sciences. The attack on the capital, while terrifying, had an unintended effect. It galvanized the people of Wano. The threat was no longer an abstract declaration from a distant god, it was real, and it had reached their homes. Fear was replaced by a grim, burning anger. Carpenters worked day and night to repair the damage. Blacksmiths toiled at their forges, crafting swords and armor. Fishermen reinforced their boats, ready to fight on the sea. The entire nation began to move as one, its heart beating to the rhythm of a war drum. In the days that followed, the calm before the storm settled. It was a tense, precious time, and everyone knew it might be their last. The Straw Hats and the people of Wano trained relentlessly, but they also lived. Sanji's kitchens produced magnificent feasts, defiant celebrations of life in the face of death. Brook played his violin in the evenings, his soulful melodies a balm for frayed nerves. Chopper and the country's doctors stockpiled medical supplies. Frankie worked tirelessly with the shipwrights, outfitting Wano's fleet with bizarre and powerful cola-powered weaponry. It was during this lull that Naruto, Hiyori, and Yamato found a rare moment for themselves. They stole away from He-War councils and the training grounds, seeking refuge in the small, secluded garden where Hiyori had first taught Naruto the shamisen. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. They didn't speak of the war. They didn't speak of gods or armadas. Hiyori sat close to Naruto, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you remember the first day we met properly?" she asked softly. "You were sleeping under a tree. And I thought you were the strangest, loudest man I had ever seen." Naruto chuckled. "I thought you were a ghost at first. The most beautiful ghost I'd ever seen." Yamato lay on the grass, her head in Naruto's lap, staring up at the darkening sky. "I met you when you fell from the sky," she said, her voice unusually quiet. "Just like Odin, I knew from that moment. You were the one he was waiting for. The one who would bring the dawn." "I didn't know anything about any of that," Naruto admitted, stroking her hair. "I was just looking for my friends and trying not to get killed by a dragon." They fell into a comfortable silence, the weight of their shared history settling around them. The fighter, the princess, and the monster's son, all of them broken in their own ways, who had somehow found a way to become whole together. "I'm scared," Hiyori whispered, her voice so soft Naruto barely heard it. "Not for myself, but for this." She gestured vaguely at the peaceful garden. "The distant lights of the capital. For the home we've built. For the future we've talked about." Yamato reached up and took Hiyori's hand, her grip surprisingly gentle. "We won't lose it. I won't let him take it from us." "Neither will I," Naruto said, his voice a low, firm promise. He looked at the two women who had become his world. Hiyori, his anchor, his peace, the soul of his kingdom. Yamato, his storm, his fire, the spirit of his freedom. "After this is over," he said, a sudden conviction in his voice. "When we win, I want to see the world. With both of you." He looked at Yamato. "You've been trapped on this island your whole life. You deserve to see what's out there." Then he looked at Hiyori. "And you deserve to see a world that isn't trying to kill you. To walk down a street in a foreign city and just be." Tears welled in both their eyes. It was such a simple dream, and yet, in their world, the most impossible one of all. It was a promise of a future beyond this fight. Hiyori reached into her sleeve and pulled out a long, exquisitely embroidered sash. It was deep indigo, with a pattern of golden moons. "This was my father's," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He wore it on the day he set sail with Whitebeard. It is a sash for a man beginning a great adventure." She carefully wrapped it around Naruto's waist, over his haori. "For when you go to face Icarus. So you carry my father's dream with you." Yamato sat up, a mischievous but earnest look on her face. She reached into her sash and pulled out a small, roughly carved wooden charm. It was a miniature Oni mask, painted a fierce red, with a goofy, lopsided grin. "I made this," she said, a faint blush on her cheeks. "It's supposed to be me. To scare away evil spirits. Or, gods." She pressed it into his hand. For luck. Naruto looked at the sash, a symbol of heritage and destiny. He looked at the clumsy charm, a symbol of fierce, untamed love. He closed his hand around the charm. His heart so full it felt like it would burst. He had fought for villages, for friends, for the world. But now, he was fighting for this. For a quiet evening in a garden with the women he loved. He pulled them both close. Burying his face in their hair, a king drawing strength from his queens. "Thank you," he whispered. Their moment of peace was broken. Not by a sound, but by a feeling. A single shadow clone, the furthest one out, on the very edge of his range, dispelled. The memory it sent back was not of an attack. It was a vision. A sky filled with white sails. Hundreds of them. A fleet so vast it blotted out the horizon, all unified under the banner of the world government. The ships themselves were magnificent, plated in gold and white, moving with an unnatural speed. And at their head, hovering in the air as if it were his birthright, was a figure of terrible, blinding beauty. He was tall and impossibly perfect, with hair like spun gold and eyes that glowed with holy light. From his back sprouted 6 wings. Not of feather, but of pure, solid energy, casting a divine radiance that turned the ocean to gold. Saint Jagarcia Icarus. He was not looking at the clone. He was looking past it. His gaze fixed on the distant shores of Wano, his expression not of anger or malice, but of serene, absolute purpose. The expression of a craftsman about to wipe clean a flawed piece of pottery. Naruto stood up, his body thrumming with power. The peace was over. The storm had arrived. He looked down at Hiyori and Yamato, at the fear and resolve mingling in their eyes. He gave them a smile. It was not the grin of a reckless boy, but the confident, reassuring smile of a king, a husband, a protector. "It's time," he said. The Celestial Armada had arrived. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. War for the Dawn. The sky itself seemed to hold its breath. From the shores of Kuri, the Celestial Armada was a breathtaking, horrifying spectacle. It was not the brutish, chaotic fleet of a pirate emperor, but a vision of divine, ordered wrath. The white and gold ships, hundreds strong, moved in perfect, geometric formations, cutting through the waves with an unnatural silence. At their head, bathing the sea in an ethereal golden glow, hovered Saint Jagarcia Icarus. His 6 wings of light beat slowly, powerfully, with the arrogance of a being who did not believe in the concept of defeat. The war began not with a cannonball, but with a song. From the highest tower in the flower capital, a sound began to swell. It was carried across the island by a network of Den Den Mushi that Sanji's network had painstakingly set up. The haunting, beautiful melody of a shamisen. Hiyori was playing. She played the song of her father, the song of Wano's suffering and its unbreakable spirit. It was not a lament. It was a war cry. A declaration broadcast to every corner of her nation. We are still here. We still endure. We will not break. The song washed over the defenders, and it was more potent than any commander's speech. It found the samurai lining the coastal cliffs, their hands steadying on the hilts of their swords. It found the minks on their ships, their fur bristling with ire hearts pounding in time with the music. It found the Udon Brigade, their knuckles white on their crude weapons, the melody a reminder of the home they were now fighting for. On a cliff overlooking Tokage Port, Naruto stood beside Zoro and Yamato, the wind whipping at his haori. He could feel the song resonating within him, a river of hope flowing into the vast ocean of his chakra. He could also feel the enemy. A cold, sterile righteousness from Icarus, and a buzzing, unified emptiness from the thousands of soldiers and machines under his command. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" Yamato said, a wild, dangerous grin on her face. "So clean, so perfect. They're going to look so much better when we smash them into pieces." Zoro just grunted, his hand resting on Shisui's hilt. "Too much flash. Let's see if they can bleed." Naruto closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and let the full, untamed power of Kurama surge through him. The calm, golden aura of his sage's flow erupted into a blazing, incandescent inferno of orange chakra. His body transformed, cloaked in a coat of pure energy, the markings of the Sage of 6 Paths blazing across his back. His presence became a second sun in the sky, a defiant, demonic orange against Icarus's holy gold. "Let's go," he said, his voice a fusion of his own and the ancient, rumbling power within him. He leapt from the cliff, a living meteor of defiance. The war for the dawn had begun. The first clash happened at sea. Icarus, with a lazy wave of his hand, sent his vanguard forward. These were not ordinary marine ships, but automated, paddle-wheeled vessels crewed by advanced pacifistas. They moved with perfect, inhuman precision. They are an affront to the very soul of the sea. Jinbei roared from the deck of his flagship, a massive vessel donated by the Yakuza. He was surrounded by the Mink fleet and the rugged, repurposed ships of the Udon Brigade. Men of the sea, show these machines the chaos of a real storm. Fish man karate. Bariken. Jinbei thrust his palms forward, launching a torrent of water infused with haki that blew a hole straight through the lead pacifista ship. The sea battle devolved into a brutal, chaotic melee. The minks, in their Sulong forms, were blurs of white fur and lightning, leaping between ships, their claws tearing through steel plating. The Udon Brigade, led by roaring Gantetsu, used their force and knowledge of dirty fighting to ram and board the enemy vessels, their wildness a perfect counter to the pacifista's rigid programming. But the celestial armada was vast. For every ship they sank, two more took its place. Cannons firing beams of concentrated light, the same technology as the Seraphim, began to strafe Wano's fleet, vaporizing entire sections of their ships. The sea boiled, a churning chaos of splintered wood, twisted metal, and the roar of battle, all set to the unbroken, defiant melody of Hiyori's shamisen. On land, the invasion began. Hundreds of landing craft, disgorging thousands of emotionless, armored soldiers, swarmed the beaches of Kuri. These were the gods' knights, the rank-and-file soldiers of the celestial dragon's holy army. They fought with disciplined fury, their spears and swords tipped with what looked like miniature seastone shards. They were met by a wall of steel. The samurai of Wano, 10,000 strong, stood their ground on the shores, their blades flashing in the morning sun. At their head was Roronoa Zoro, 3 swords drawn, a demon of the battlefield. "Remember who you are," Zoro bellowed, his voice cutting through the din. "You are the samurai of Wano. Your blades carry the soul of this country. Now, show these puppets what that soul looks like." He charged, a whirlwind of death. 3-sword style. Purgatory onigiri. He carved a path deep into the enemy ranks, his haki-infused blades turning armor and flesh alike to ribbons. The samurai, inspired by his demonic charge, roared and followed him, crashing into the gods' knights like a tidal wave of steel. The battle for the beaches was a grinder, a brutal, close-quarters slugfest. But the gods' knights were not the only threat. From the sky, new figures descended. More seraphim, a dozen of them, each one wielding the powers of a former warlord. One with the sand-based abilities of Crocodile, another with the string powers of Doflamingo, a third with the shadow abilities of Moria. It was into this chaos that Yamato descended. She landed in the middle of the battlefield with the force of a comet, the ground shattering around her. She was already in her mythical zone form, a divine beast of ice and fury. "You want to play with monsters?" she roared, her voice echoing across the plains. "I'm the guardian deity of this land. Come and face me." The seraphim, their programming identifying her as a priority target, converged on her. Yamato met them with savage joy. Her club, Takaru, became a blur of motion, each swing carrying the force of a glacier. She ashed the sand seraphim with a haki-infused blow that destabilized its logia-like form. She froze the string seraphim's wires solid with a blast of her glacial burst, shattering them like glass. She became a one-woman army, a force of nature holding back a tide of artificial gods. The Udon Brigade and the samurai rallied around her, their morale soaring. They were fighting alongside a living legend, and it made them fearless. But even she could not be everywhere at once. The battlefield was immense, the enemy endless. High above the chaos, the true battle was taking place. The sky was split in two, a canvas of screaming orange and radiant gold. Naruto, in his full Kurama chakra mode, had become a colossal avatar, a 9-tailed fox made of pure, searing energy. He faced Saint Icarus, who as wreathed in the holy light of his archangel form. Their clash was a cataclysm. "You are an abomination, demon fox," Icarus's voice echoed, devoid of heat, a simple statement of fact. Your very power is a stain upon this world. I will cleanse it. He thrust his hand forward, and a spear of solid, golden light, 100 meters long, formed and shot towards Naruto. It moved faster than sound, its tip hot enough to melt mountains. Naruto's chakra avatar formed a massive Rasengan, a spiraling sphere of planetary devastation, and met the spear head-on. The impact was silent for a terrifying moment, and then the sky exploded. A shockwave of pure energy erupted outwards, dissipating the clouds for 100 kilometers in every direction. The force flattened a small mountain on a nearby island, and sent a tsunami racing away from Wano. Is that all your divine power can do? Naruto's voice, amplified by Kurama's chakra, boomed across the heavens. My power comes from my bonds. From the people who believe in me. It's a power you'll never understand. He formed 2 more chakra arms, creating 2 more Rasenshurikens. He launched them, not directly at Icarus, but at angles, intending to box him in. Icarus simply smiled, a serene, infuriating expression. Your power is born of emotion. It is chaotic, flawed. Mine is absolute, divine. He spread his wings, and a field of golden energy erupted from him, a perfect spherical barrier. The Rasenshurikens impacted against it and detonated, their world-slicing winds unable to penetrate the shield. You cannot defeat order with chaos, Icarus stated. He pointed a finger down at the flower capital, visible in the distance. A thin beam of holy fire, hotter than magma, shot from his fingertip. Naruto's eyes widened in fury. Hiyori was there. He moved with a speed that defied physics, his colossal avatar intercepting the beam. The holy fire seared into his chakra form, causing it to hiss and sputter. The pain was immense, a burning ago. That felt like it was scorching his very soul. He roared, a sound of pure protective rage, and swiped at Icarus with a massive chakra claw. Icarus dodged with effortless grace. You see, your attachments make you weak. Predictable. The battle became a terrible dance. Naruto's attacks were wild, devastating, each one capable of leveling an island. But Icarus was a master of defense and precision. His holy fire burned away Naruto's chakra. His light construct weapons were impossibly sharp and fast. Every time Naruto landed a blow, Icarus's body would glow, and the wound would seal with golden light. A healing factor that seemed limitless. Naruto was raw, overwhelming power. Icarus was perfect, unyielding order. And order was slowly, methodically winning. Down on the battlefield, the defenders were being pushed back. Zoro was bleeding from a dozen minor cuts, locked in a furious duel with 3 seraphim at once. Sanji, having joined the front lines after securing the civilian retreat, was a fiery comet of kicks. But he was overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Jinbei's fleet was burning. Yamato saw it all. She saw Zoro starting to tire. She saw Sanji taking a hit from a pacifista beam. And she saw, high in the sky, Naruto's chakra avatar take another direct hit from Icarus's holy fire, its form flickering violently. A guttural roar tore from her throat, a sound of such primal rage and desperation that it momentarily silenced the battlefield around her. She looked up at the sky, at the man she loved being methodically dismantled by a golden god. Naruto. She channeled every ounce of her power, every bit of her love and her rage, into her club. A massive aura of glacial energy, far larger than anything she had ever summoned before, exploded from her. Absolute Zero. Maha Rahu. It was not a beam or a slash. It was a wave of pure cold, an absolute winter that shot into the sky. It wasn't aimed to harm Icarus, but to help Naruto. The wave of absolute zero temperature washed over Naruto's burning avatar. The holy fire, which had been eating away at his chakra, was instantly extinguished by the impossible cold, hissing into nothingness. It gave Naruto a single, precious moment of reprieve. He looked down, saw Yamato, her form steaming, having expended a massive amount of energy, and his heart clenched. He saw Hiyori's song faltering for a beat before stealing itself and continuing, a desperate prayer. He saw his friends, his people, bleeding and dying for him. For the home he had promised them. Something inside him shifted. He had been fighting like a demon, a force of destruction against another force of destruction. But that wasn't who he was. He was a protector. The colossal Kurama avatar began to shrink, the raging orange chakra receding, condensing. It flowed back into Naruto, not vanishing, but concentrating, refining. The nine-tailed beast form dissolved, leaving Naruto floating in the sky, once again cloaked in the calm, golden aura of his sage's flow. But it was different now. The golden light was so bright, so dense, it looked almost solid. He had fused the entirety of Kurama's immense power with the perfect balance of his sage mode. Icarus watched this, his serene expression finally showing a flicker of curiosity. Giving up, demon, surrendering to the inevitable. Naruto didn't answer, he just held up a hand. He began to gather natural energy. Not just from Wano, but from the sea, the sky, the very planet itself. The world seemed to dim slightly as its life force flowed into him. The air grew heavy, thick with a power that dwarfed anything seen in the battle so far. In his hand, a Rasengan began to form. It was no bigger than his fist, but it did not spin with chaotic energy. It was a perfect, silent sphere of pure white light, containing the condensed hope of a nation. The rage of a demon, and the balanced energy of the world itself. It was the culmination of everything he was. You talk about order, Icarus, Naruto said, his voice quiet. Yet it carried across the sky, a stark contrast to his earlier roars. But order without freedom is a prison. You call yourself divine, but a god who demands obedience is just a tyrant with a better title. He looked down at Wano, at the fires and the fighting, at the unbroken spirit embodied in Hiyori's song. This is my home, he said, his voice hardening. This is my family, and you are not welcome here. He disappeared, not with a burst of speed, but by simply ceasing to be in one place and appearing in another. He was in front of Icarus, the small, silent sphere of white energy held forward. Icarus's eyes widened for the first time in genuine shock. He tried to raise his barrier, to summon a light spear, but he was too slow. Naruto's new state wasn't just about power, it was about a level of perception and speed that transcended the physical. The silent sphere touched Icarus's chest. There was no explosion, no sound, no cataclysm. There was only light. A wave of pure, white, absolute energy washed over Icarus. His perfect, golden form, his archangel wings, his divine armor, it all just dissolved. Not burned, not shattered, but unmade. The energy was not destructive, it was purifying. It was the energy of life itself, and it was anathema to Icarus's sterile, artificial divinity. The celestial armada, its connection to its leader severed, faltered. The pacifistas and seraphim froze for a half-second. Their programming stuttering. It was the opening the warriors of Wano needed. Zoro, Yamato, Sanji, and Jinbei led a furious, desperate counter-charge, and the tide of the war, for the first time, began to turn. High in the sky, as the white light faded, Icarus was still there. But he was changed. His wings were gone. His armor was gone. He was just a man, floating in the air. His impossibly perfect features now contorted in a mask of confusion and fear. Naruto's attack hadn't just stripped him of his power. It had stripped him of his godhood. He looked at his hands, then at Naruto. His mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. He had been absolute. He had been divine. And this blasphemous demon, had just turned him into a mere man. Naruto floated before him, his own power receding, exhaustion finally beginning to set in. He had won the battle of gods. Now, he had to win the war of ideas. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Unbroken Kingdom. The silence in the sky was a deafening contrast to the roaring war below. Saint Jagarcia Icarus, or the man who had been Icarus, floated, stripped bare of his divine mantle. The golden light was gone, the 6 wings of energy were gone. The serene arrogance was gone. All that remained was a man in the simple white robes of a celestial dragon, his face a canvas of utter disbelief. The god had been dethroned, and he couldn't comprehend the fall. Naruto hovered opposite him, the immense power he had gathered receding back into the world, leaving him breathing heavily, his body aching with a bone-deep exhaustion. The fusion of Kurama's full power with his sage's flow had pushed him to a limit he hadn't known existed. He had won the clash of titans, but the war wasn't over. The real victory had to be cemented now. What did you do to me? Icarus whispered, his voice no longer the resonant chime of a deity, but the thin, trembling tone of a mortal. He looked at his hands, at the pale, unglowing flesh. My connection to the holy firmament, it's gone. I didn't do anything to you, Naruto said, his voice quiet but firm, carrying across the small space between them. I just showed you the truth. Your power wasn't yours. It was borrowed. A title, a system, a belief. It was hollow. That's why it broke. Below them, the faltering of the celestial armada had been a fatal crack in their perfect facade. Zoro, seeing the god in the sky fall, let out a savage laugh and unleashed a new level of his conqueror's haki. The black and red lightning that erupted from his blades was so immense that it caused a third of the god's knights on the beach to foam at the mouth and collapse, their wills shattered. Yamato, energized by Naruto's survival, fought with renewed, joyful fury. She and Gentetsu led the Udon Brigade in a devastating charge that broke the main enemy line, scattering the seraphim and creating chaos in the once perfect formations. The tide had not just turned, it was a tsunami of defiance. Washing away the invaders, Icarus watched the chaos, his mind reeling. No, this is wrong. There is order, there is hierarchy, the divine rule, the lesser obey. This is anarchy. This is chaos. You call it chaos, Naruto countered, moving closer, his posture non-threatening. I call it life. It's messy, it's loud, it's full of people making their own choices, fighting for what they love. He gestured with his head towards the battle below, not at the violence, but at the auras of emotion he could feel so clearly. Down there, I don't feel programs or dogma. I feel a samurai fighting for the honor of his grandfather's sword. I feel a former pirate fighting for the first home he's ever known. I feel a mink fighting for the memory of a friend who dreamed of this day. He floated directly in front of Icarus, close enough to see the flicker of confusion in the man's eyes. This was the most important part of the battle. He didn't just need to defeat the god, he needed to break the man's conviction. My power isn't a gift from the heavens, Icarus. It's the result of every bond I've ever made. The love of my parents. The teachings of my masters. The trust of my friends. He paused, and his mind filled with the images of Hiyori and Yamato. The love of my family. It's a power built from the ground up, not handed down from on high. That's why it's stronger. That's why you lost. He used his sage's flow, not to attack, but to connect. He pushed his own senses, his own emotions, into Icarus's mind. He didn't show him grand philosophies. He showed him small, simple truths. He showed him a child in the capital sharing her candy with the shogun. He showed him the rough hands of a former pirate helping a samurai clear rubble in Udon. He showed him Hiyori's tearful smile as she played her father's song, and Yamato's fierce, protective rage as she defended her home. He showed him a world of messy, beautiful, unbreakable connections. Icarus staggered back in the air, clutching his head. His mind, accustomed to the clean, sterile lines of divine order, was being flooded with the chaotic, vibrant, overwhelming reality of humanity. He saw the world not through the lens of a god passing judgment, but through the eyes of the people he had come to erase. And it was too much. The foundation of his entire existence, his righteous crusade, his divine purpose, it all crumbled to dust. The heavens have no place for such disorder, he stammered, but the words were hollow, a mantra he no longer believed. He was a priest who had lost his faith. Maybe the heavens have it wrong, then. Naruto said gently. He drew back his fist. Icarus, his instinct screaming, flinched, but he was too slow, too broken to react. The punch wasn't aimed at his face. Naruto's fist, glowing with a soft, warm light, stopped an inch from Icarus's chest. A Rasengan, infused not with destructive power, but with the combined natural energy and hope of Wano, pulsed in his palm. It was the same attack he had used to heal Kageyama's poisoned soul. He pressed it gently against Icarus's sternum. Sage art. The people's will. The energy flowed into Icarus. It didn't hurt him. It didn't break him further. It simply connected him. For a single, overwhelming moment, Icarus felt the collective will of Wano. He felt their fear, their rage, their sorrow, their love for their land. Their fierce loyalty to each other and to the man who had brought them the dawn. He felt the soul of a nation. The last vestiges of his divine pride shattered. He let out a choked sob, the first true, raw emotion he had likely ever expressed. The archangel of the Holy Land was broken, not by a demon's power, but by a hero's empathy. He began to fall from the sky, a man with nothing left, his eyes vacant. Naruto caught him, slinging his arm over his shoulder. He looked down at the battlefield. The Celestial Armada was in full retreat, harassed at every turn by Jinbei's fleet. The god's knights on the ground were surrendering in droves. The battle was won. With the last of his strength, Naruto flew down, carrying the broken god with him. He landed in the main plaza of Tokage Port, where the remaining marine soldiers, now leaderless, were being rounded up. He dropped the unconscious Icarus at the feet of a terrified marine captain. "Take him back to your masters," Naruto said, his voice echoing with the authority of the victor. "Tell the 5 elders what happened here. Tell them Wano is under my protection. Tell them the age of gods hiding in the heavens is over." He turned his back on them, a profound statement of dismissal, and began the long walk back towards his friends, towards his family. The aftermath of the war was a landscape of devastation and defiant hope. The coast of Kuri was scarred, littered with the wreckage of ships and the detritus of battle. But the rebuilding began almost immediately. There was no despair. Wano had faced a god and won. A spirit of unbreakable resilience, a feeling of invincibility, swept through the nation. They had paid a high price, with many brave samurai and minks having fallen, but their sacrifice had purchased a future they now truly believed in. Naruto, Hiyori, and Yamato stood on the same cliff where the war had begun, looking out over the sea as the sun began to rise, its rays painting the water in hues of orange and gold. They were battered, bruised, and utterly exhausted, but they were together. Hiyori leaned against Naruto's side, her head on his shoulder. Her hands were bandaged from playing the shamisen for nearly 12 straight hours. Her fingers raw, but her face was serene. "A new dawn," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "A real one." Yamato stood on his other side, her arms slung casually around his shoulders. Her usual boisterous energy replaced by a deep, quiet contentment. "He really was a god," she murmured, looking at the horizon. "And you broke him." "No," Naruto said, pulling them both closer, their bodies a small island of warmth in the cool morning air. "We broke him. All of us. Your ice gave me the opening I needed." Hiyori's song gave the entire country the will to fight. Zoro, Sanji, Jinbei, everyone. This victory belongs to all of Wano. He was right, and they knew it. This wasn't the story of one man defeating an army. It was the story of a nation refusing to kneel. They stood in silence for a long time, simply watching the sun climb higher, burning away the last shadows of the long night. They didn't talk of reconstruction, or politics, or the repercussions of their victory. They just existed in the quiet peace they had earned, their shared love a tangible presence between them. Months passed. Wano healed. The scars on the land began to fade, covered by new growth. The ruins of the war became monuments, reminders of the day they had defied the heavens. The story of the battle spread across the world like a wildfire. In oppressed kingdoms and forgotten islands, people heard of the Golden Fox Shogun who had struck down a celestial dragon, and a dangerous new idea began to take root: freedom was possible. Bounties were issued. Naruto's was astronomical, simple. Why stating his name and threat to the world order, with a picture of him in his fused Kurama Sage mode. Hiyori and Yamato were designated as his empresses of blasphemy, their own bounties high enough to make them legends. They framed them and hung them in the palace dining hall. The world had changed, and Wano was now at its epicenter. Delegations came, not to conquer, but to learn. The Revolutionary Army sent envoys in secret. Shanks sent a cask of sake with a cryptic note of congratulations. The world was holding its breath, waiting to see what Wano would do next. But for Naruto, Hiyori, and Yamato, the future began in a small garden behind the palace. It was a perfect afternoon. The air was warm, filled with the scent of flowers. Naruto lay on the grass, his head pillowed on his arms, watching with a peaceful smile. A group of children, a mix of samurai kids, city kids, and the children of the Udon Brigade, were attacking Yamato with wooden swords. She was laughing, her movement, a blur of graceful evasion and playful taps. Her mythical zone form a story she now told them at bedtime, not a power she used in war. She had found her freedom not in sailing the seas, but in being a protector, a teacher. A big sister to a new generation. Nearby, under the shade of a cherry blossom tree, Hiyori sat, a gentle smile on her face. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, a clear, visible promise of a new life. A new lineage for Wano that blended the blood of a Kazuki with the will of an Uzumaki. She had found her peace, not in hiding, but in building a future with her own hands. Naruto watched them, his heart so full of a quiet, profound joy it almost ached. He had chased peace his entire life, fighting gods and monsters, crossing dimensions, seeking a world without hatred. He had never imagined he would find it here, in a quiet garden, as a king, a husband, and a soon-to-be father. He had his home. He closed his eyes, content. The world outside was still a raging storm. Five elders were surely plotting their revenge. The mysterious, shadowy figure of Amu, the true sovereign of the world, would undoubtedly turn its ancient, malevolent gaze upon their island. The war was over, but the great storm, the fight for the soul of the world, was only just beginning. But here, in this moment, there was peace. He had his family, he had his home, and for the man who had been alone for so long, that was a victory greater than defeating any god. He had brought the dawn, and now, he could finally live in its light. Chapter 7 End.